Chapter 953. Katie's body spun madly and turned into a golden tornado. She gripped her metal spikes tightly and aimed at the Balrog's heart. The timing of her attack was perfect. It happened to be when Gallum had just finished casting Flame Leap. After transforming into a terrifying Balrog, Grimm's movement speed and body movements were not as fast as when he was in his human form. His reaction speed was not as fast either. What she was attacking was precisely the core high-energy organ of Grimm's body. If she succeeded, the damage she would inflict on Grimm would either kill him or cripple him. However, Grimm had chased her all the way to Hawkins City, and she had secretly hidden herself during the battle. Of course, Grimm had his guard up against her. With the Balrog's speed, it was impossible for him to dodge Katie's attack, and it was unwise to take her attack head-on at such a close distance. Therefore, Grimm collapsed without any hesitation. When Katie turned into a golden tornado and was only half a meter away from touching the Balrog's magma armor, the 6-meter-tall Balrog, which was made up of lava rocks, crimson magma, and ferocious flames, collapsed in an instant. Thousands of pieces of lava and rubble collapsed like a collapsing mountain, and the flowing magma and flames instantly lost control, collapsing and spilling in all directions. Katie used her metal spikes as a drill and her densely packed blades as a saw. The golden tornado pierced through the collapsed rocks and lava, mincing everything it came into contact with into tiny particles. However, strangely enough, she did not sense or touch any life energy. The golden tornado disappeared, and Katie returned to her human form. She stood alone on a pile of ruins with black smoke billowing out of it. She held her breath and focused on searching for the wizard's traces. The sudden appearance of the girl attracted the attention of a few fiery creatures nearby. Out of hatred for life, they roared and charged at Katie. "Shut up! Go to hell!" Katie, who was fuming with rage after her ambush failed, swung her metal blade wheel. 5 streaks of golden light instantly slashed across the bodies of the fiery creatures. The bodies of these flame creatures, which were only at the stage 1 level, were instantly destroyed, turning into a rain of fire. However, within this rain of fire that filled the sky, there was a strange sound of metal blades cutting through steel mixed within. Katie turned around abruptly and was surprised to find that one of the fire creatures was still alive. It was roaring as it charged forward, expanding rapidly. Katie, on the other hand, had embedded a metal wheel into its back and turned it into a flaming wheel, but it was unable to penetrate it at all. The body of this fiery creature that resembled a demonic tiger seemed to be expanding endlessly. What was more frightening was that the energy aura on its body was also skyrocketing crazily. Tier 1. Tier 2. Tier 3. Katie's body and soul almost went numb when she saw a flame tiger, who was only a quasi-wizard before, turn into a terrifying, Grade 3 flame beast in such a short time. How was this possible? Howl, a wild tiger's roar shook the soul. The ferocious flaming tiger withstood the attacks of the metal wheel and charged towards Katie. Damn it, it's the elemental helper that the wizard summoned from the other world, and it's a Grade 3 helper. Katie's heart crumbled at this moment. She could guess that if she did not appear, this Grade 3 flame tiger that was disguised as a small flame spirit would have been prepared for the Gold Tier Knight. Now that she had shown herself, she immediately became the target of the enemy's attack. Unfortunately, the situation did not allow her to hesitate or regret. With a violent bang, a man and a tiger fiercely fought against each other, instantly turning the ruins into a terrifying battlefield. The Gold Tier Knight who was galloping over saw this and immediately reined in his warhorse. He looked at the intense battlefield and was momentarily at a loss. Enemies, enemies. They're all enemies. Should he kill them all in one fell swoop, or help one side kill the other? Or should I sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight, waiting for them to kill each other? Just as he was hesitating, the team of paladins attacking the elemental magic machine encountered a problem. A Grade 2 Silver Tier Knight could not dodge in time, and the elemental magic machine's right hand spat out a stream of crimson flames that ignited his entire body, charring him along with his horse. Although he was rescued by his companions in time and dragged to the side for holy healing, such a serious injury meant that he could not return to the battlefield. And because of this, there was an opening in the team attacking the elemental magic machine, giving the opponent a chance to escape. The Gold Tier Knight saw that the situation was not good, and he could not care less about the two enemies who were locked in a fierce battle. He turned his horse around and charged towards the elemental magic machine. At the edge of the battlefield, a strange face suddenly appeared in the flames of a burning house. It opened its golden eyes and scanned the battlefield coldly. Seeing that the Gold Tier Knight did not intervene in the battle between the two Grade 3 knights, but instead went to attack the elemental magic machine, the flaming face sneered and finally shifted its attention to Katie. Of course, the flaming face was created by Grimm, and this technique was actually learned from Sindar the Flaming Tiger. Using real flames to hide one's body was also the ultimate technique of some flame creatures. If it was not for Sindar's guidance, Grimm would not have been able to do this without decades of hard work. Grimm turned into a pure flame and weaved in and out of the sea of flames. Compared to the body of a human and a fiery demon, the pure body of flames was actually more compatible with Grimm's soul origin, and it was also more unpredictable. Moreover, after turning into a formless body of flames, his movement speed was faster and stealthier than ever before. As long as there was a flame, he could travel freely, and he did not even need to use the power of witchcraft. This would also reduce the possibility of his enemies discovering him. While patrolling around Katie and Sindar the Flaming Tiger, Grimm watched their battle from the side while looking for the best opportunity to attack. He knew that Katie was aware of his existence. He also knew that the other party was definitely trying to find him, and the best way to do so was to create an opening to lure him into attacking. Thus, he needed to find an opportunity to attack, and it definitely could not be a trap set by the enemy. This was a test of his eyesight. Katie was fighting with all her might. The flaming tiger in front of her was surprisingly difficult to deal with. Unlike the elemental bodies of ordinary elemental creatures, this flaming tiger not only had Oj's skillful control of the fire element, it also had a sturdy body. That's right, its semi-elemental body seemed to have been mixed with some kind of strange metal, and it was actually as sturdy as a superalp. The remaining skin on Katie's face couldn't help but twitch as she watched the ferocious flaming tiger, which was made of pure elemental flames, resisting the attacks of the 5 metal blades and 2 metal spikes without giving in at all. As she fought, she screamed in her heart. After all, the 5-sided metal wheel blades and the 2 metal spikes were high-level witchcraft weapons. Not only were they sturdy, they were also imbued with several very practical anti-magic effects. However, when such a compound attack landed on the flaming tiger's body, it was as if they were hitting a superalloy bronze statue. Apart from the dazzling sparks and loud noises that made people want to cover their ears, not even a single strand of tiger fur was cut. Relying on the sturdiness of its body, the flaming tiger pounced on Katie swiftly and violently, breathing flames, sweeping its tail, and letting out a ferocious roar that shook one's soul. Katie was unable to break free, and she could not focus on finding the whereabouts of that damned fire wizard. Relying on her keen battle instincts, Katie could vaguely sense a deep hostility flowing in the sea of fire around her. Unfortunately, she was busy dealing with the flaming tiger's attacks, and could not pinpoint the source of the hostility. This undoubtedly made Katie, who was injured and unable to break free, even more irritated and suspicious. Just as Katie was worrying about her gains and losses, the flaming tiger Sindar let out a deafening roar. A copious amount of wild aura gathered into a cone-shaped shockwave, striking Katie's rapidly moving body. Katie's petite body trembled slightly, and her mind was shaken by the sudden sound wave attack. Seizing this good opportunity, the flaming tiger Sindar and Grimm, who was lying in ambush nearby, attacked at the same time. Their fiercest attacks landed on Katie's body. Facing a pincer attack from two powerful grade 3 magi, even with Katie's conceit, she could clearly feel the aura of death approaching. Katie didn't dare to hold back anymore. She raised her head and let out a sky-piercing scream. A dozen metal blades popped out of her body and combined with the original 5 blades, forming a terrifying metal blade array that revolved around her body crazily. Any close-range attacks or long-range spells that wanted to hit Katie would have to endure the frenzied strangulation and violent slashes of the metal blade formation. This was a multi-layered attack, and anyone who dared to approach Katie would have to endure the physical attacks of each wheel blade at 173 degrees per second. Once these attacks overlapped, even the strongest defensive spell would not be able to withstand the frenzied attacks of so many wheel blade. Sindar had just rushed to Katie's side, waving his flaming claws and leaving 7 to 8 bone-deep wounds on her body. He was shocked and quickly fled to the periphery. Even though he retreated as fast as lightning, he still could not avoid the frenzied strangulation of 7 to 8 metal wheel blades. Even with Sindar's strengthened flaming body, it was difficult to endure this degree of damage. Sindar let out a pained roar as he escaped from the blade formation in a sorry state. On the other side, Grimm's powerful grade 3 fire spell, Molten World, had already locked onto Katie. A dense and somewhat glaring ring of fire appeared beneath Katie's feet, and a huge pillar of crimson flames appeared with her at the center. The temperature in the field began to soar. 1,000 degrees, 2,000 degrees, 3,000 degrees. The terrifyingly high temperature ignited Katie's clothes, and her exposed skin turned red and scalding. The scorching air made it difficult for her to breathe. As she breathed, she felt her flesh and organs begin to congeal and dry up. With Katie's strength, controlling 5 metal wheel blades was her normal ability. She would only release all the wheel blades stored in her body when she was fighting with her life on the line. Even with her mental strength, it was difficult for her to endure such a huge consumption of mental strength. Hence, Katie could not be bothered to retaliate against Grimm. Instead, she dragged her heavily injured body and ran away in a flustered manner. Chapter 954. Faced with a heavily injured Katie, Grimm hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he let her go. It wasn't that Grimm was being merciful, but that the gains did not make up for the losses. As expected of a grade 3 mechanical sorceress, even with such severe injuries, she still retained the terrifying strength to perish together with her enemies. The injuries she suffered this time were not the same as before. Previously, she had only suffered superficial injuries, but her physical body and soul had not suffered any damage. She only needed some time to recuperate and adjust, and she would be able to return to her peak state. However, the injuries she suffered this time were not the same as before. Apart from the damage to her physical body, even her soul seemed to have been invaded by the flames. It was likely that she would not be able to recover from such injuries in the Invictus plane. The only thing Katie could do now was to return to a higher plane as soon as possible and find some suitable resources to expel the terrifying flames in her body. Otherwise, if this dragged on for too long, her strength might even degrade. To a powerful magus with a proud heart, this was worse than death. After chasing Katie away, Grimm heaved a sigh of relief. He could finally focus on dealing with the group of Holy Knights. In fact, apart from these Holy Knights, there were also 3,000 regular soldiers of the Empire in Hakanth City. Unfortunately, with their strength, they did not have the qualifications to participate in a planar war of this level. Forget Grimm and his elemental equipment, even the Plague Spirit, which was only at the peak of Grade 2, was enough to raze Hakanth City to the ground. Hence, at the start of the war, the garrison tried to get close to the battlefield to reinforce the Holy Knight. However, they could not even get close to the main battlefield, and nearly 100 of them were wiped out by the spillover of spells. When the large group of flame creatures rushed out of the battlefield, The garrison could only fight them bravely in the streets and alleys of the city. Even if they had the courage and bravery to defend their homeland, they were still too weak and insignificant compared to the flame elementals that had come from another plane. The entire city was filled with battle cries, thick smoke billowing and waves of fire scorching. Looking down from the sky, Hawkins City seemed to have turned into a fiery purgatory, dragging everyone and everything into a terrible massacre and destruction. In the middle of the battlefield, a huge sea of fire suddenly blew up a strange whirlwind. The continuous flames gathered together and slowly condensed into a 7-meter-tall flame giant. Soon after, the flame giant's face froze, revealing a huge human face that looked exactly like Grim. "Don't tell me you still want me to help you deal with this strange night?" His body was covered in crisscrossing scratches. Flame Tiger Sindar slowly walked to Grim's side, perched high above the ruins, and looked down at the Grade 3 Gold Knight who was leading his team to attack the elemental equipment. "Then I'll have to refuse. This guy looks like a meat shield in a tin can. I'll be at a disadvantage if I fight him. And remember, I've already returned one of the 3 favors I owe you." He had to admit that the elemental magic machinery was indeed powerful enough. Even though it was surrounded and attacked by a Grade 3 knight and a group of Grade 2 knights, the metal shell of the elemental magic machinery was already in tatters, but the important parts of its body were still intact. Not only did its combat power not decrease, it could even kill and injure the Grade 2 Silver Knights in the midst of the heavy siege. If a Grade 2 Silver Knight were to be hit by its reinforced iron fist that contained powerful magical energy, even with the protection of the powerful holy light, they would not be able to withstand such a violent blow and would have to retreat from the battlefield to recuperate. Moreover, the elemental magic machinery would also unleash powerful magical attacks from time to time, causing unimaginable damage to the surrounding holy knight. It could be said that most of the time, the powerful combat power that the elemental magic machinery could unleash was far above that of Grim. After all, no matter how brave Grim was, he would not dare to charge into the enemy's encirclement to unleash his magical energy. However, no matter how powerful the elemental magic machinery was, it was only a matter of time before it was defeated by a Grade 3 Gold Knight and a Grade 2 Silver Knight. With the Gold Knight tanking most of the attacks from the elemental magic machinery, the remaining Grade 2 Silver Knights could attack the elemental magic machinery without any restraint. Relying on this method, the elemental magic machinery was on the verge of collapsing under their frenzied attacks. Hence, Sindar the Flaming Tiger assessed the situation and was not willing to fight head-on with these tin cans that could fight, tank, and heal. Grim chuckled and replied in a deep voice, "Don't worry, old friend. When have I ever lied to you? I'll summon another companion, and let it be in charge of charging. You should be fine following behind, right? What else can you summon?" "Hee, look at me." Grim took a step forward, his large flaming hand drawing fire runes in front of his chest as he chanted an ancient and cryptic witchcraft incantation. Sindar the Flaming Tiger tilted its head and listened for a moment. Its huge eyes suddenly widened, and it could not help but tremble. "A dragon's oath? You can summon a dragon?" Grim did not have the time to answer it. Sonorous and powerful incantations echoed on the battlefield, and flame runes collided with each other in the void, quickly forming an ancient and vicissitude magic contract. Under the constraints of the magic contract, a strange wormhole appeared in the void. Shortly after, an azure dragon more than 30 meters long crawled out of the wormhole and squeezed into the lower realm with difficulty. "I smell a terrible stench from here. Master, do you need me to fight for you already?" The newcomer was none other than Arms, the Tier 3 Thunder Dragon that had been making a name for himself in Lance. As soon as it entered the Invic Plain, it could not help but complain loudly. It was obvious that it was not comfortable with the thin magical energy here. The Thunder Dragon, Arms, had a loud voice. Although it did not roar, its majestic draconic aura and deafening roar resounded throughout Hawkins City. Of course, Grim and Sindar could understand the draconic language, but the holy knights of Hakanth City could only hear the long and terrifying roar. They had no idea what the dragon was saying. The Golden Knight originally wanted to kill the elemental equipment in one go, then turn back and fight the cunning wizard. However, just as he was about to intensify his attacks on the metal golem, the wizard summoned an even larger and mysterious dragon. This time, even he was a little flustered. Grim raised his head and looked at the thunder dragon arms hovering above his head. "Arms, do you see this city in front of you? As long as you help me kill that grade 3 knight, I'll allow you to loot this city as you please. Any treasures you find will belong to you. I don't want a cut." "Are you serious?" Arm's eyes widened when he heard Grim's words. It looked around and quickly estimated the size of the city in front of it with the rich experience of the Dragon Clan and the possible wealth it contained. With its eyes, it could naturally tell that this was a large city. Even among human cities, it was considered one of the best. Moreover, from the situation in front of him, it could be seen that this city had never been visited by a WRM before. It was definitely the kind of rich and excellent target for robbery. However, this was an unfamiliar plane. With Grim's weak mental strength, he did not know how long he could stay here. Arms did not dare to waste any more time. He raised his head and roared, flapped his wings, and dove towards the knights. Before the dragon arrived, the terrifying draconic breath was already there. It had to be said that the draconic breath of Arms was very unusual. Many people who encountered it for the first time would be at a disadvantage because of this. The invisible yet powerful sound wave quickly enveloped all the knights that were attacking the elemental equipment. Each of them raised their hands and covered their ears. At the same time, purplish-black snakes of blood spurted out of their eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. The holy light of the knights was indeed powerful. Although they had a splitting headache and their internal organs were shaken by the draconic breath, they still managed to endure it. However, even if they could endure it, the horses under them could not. The grade 3 Thunder Dragon arms dove over the heads of the knights. Wherever it passed, the horses neighed and their internal organs were crushed. One by one, the knights fell to the ground. Other than the grade 3 Gold Knight who barely managed to protect his horse with holy light, the rest of the knights, including the grade 2 Silver Knights, all fell to the ground. A good chance, Sindar the Flaming Tiger who was standing beside Grim could not help but let out a roar and charged into the battlefield. "Grim, I've put in a lot of effort today. Count me in for the fortune of this city." While charging forward, the Flaming Tiger Sindar opened its huge mouth slightly and spat out fiery red and violent fireballs, blowing up the holy knights on the battlefield one by one. As a spellcaster, Grim would not charge into the battlefield like the Flaming Tiger, the Thunder Dragon, and the elemental equipment. He stood high in the middle of the burning ruins and waved his hands, quickly conjuring fire spells and unleashing them on the battlefield. Crimson Firestorm, Meteor Shower, Doomsday Volcano, Explosive Fireball. When a powerful fire wizard could cast spells without restraint, the whole battlefield, and even the whole city, could not help but tremble in fear. The grade 3 Gold Knight who was previously invincible on the battlefield could no longer hold on against the attacks of 4 grade 3 Gold Knights. Chapter 955. With the death of the Golden Knight, Harkanth City's resistance came to an abrupt end. Without someone of the same rank restraining them, no matter how many grade 1 and grade 2 Holy Knights there were, it was pointless. At grade 3, they could no longer be defeated by simply stacking their numbers. The Holy Knights who were crippled seemed to have realized that they had lost the battle. They regrouped and retreated to the Chapel of Holy Light, hoping to rely on the terrain to defend against the wizard's attack. It was a pity that their thoughts were beautiful, but reality was always crueler than the cruelest horror novels. After killing the Golden Knight, Arms cheered and soared into the sky. After a brief look, He turned around and headed straight for the most extravagant and luxurious mansion in the city. He didn't have much time left. He had to seize every second to plunder the mansions of the city's upper class and the city's public treasury. It was a challenging and professional job. He didn't want to waste any more time. As for the Chapel of Holy Light in front of him, it was obviously a mysterious building with religious overtones. Plundering such a place would require him to kill too many stubborn guards. Not only would it be a waste of time, the only things he could loot would be ancient books, the bones of famous people in the church, or souvenirs such as clothes and armor. To the members of the church, these items might have a strong commemorative meaning, but to the dragons who only liked gold and shiny treasures, they were too old-fashioned. If he returned to Lance with such treasures, he would be laughed at by all the dragons. Arms didn't even look at the Chapel of Holy Light and rushed to the city lord's mansion in the distance. Sindar the Flaming Tiger rarely had the chance to play in another plane, so he didn't want to return empty-handed. After seeing where Lei Long had gone, it immediately flew towards the trade district of Harkant City, as if it was flying. There must be some rare treasures here that couldn't be found anywhere else. In the blink of an eye, the only ones left were the battered elemental machine and Grim, who had transformed into a tall, flaming man. The ground was littered with the corpses of the holy knights. Under Grim's command, the elemental machine roared and chased after the retreating holy knights towards the Chapel of Holy Light. Grim leisurely walked towards the remains of the Grade 3 Golden Knight. His opponent's body had already been battered into a miserable state, and Grim's final meteor blast had blasted him into pieces. The holy armor on the surface of his body was distorted beyond recognition, and his exposed skin was charred black. The surface had been completely carbonized. Grim stooped down and carefully examined the remains of the body. Blue light flashed in his black pupils as he scanned the interior of the body. As for the flame barrier, it had already been set up, preventing the Golden Knight's soul from escaping. The AI chip had analyzed the strand of mysterious holy light that he had missed previously. It was due to the pure and dense holy light, as well as a powerful and tenacious soul. The two complemented each other and could not be dispensed with. Seriously speaking, the holy light that the holy knights believed in was actually the unshakable faith in their hearts. It was just that the knights of the Envic plane had found a visible and tangible carrier for their illusory belief. That was pure light. They used light to represent the purity of their hearts, and they used light to depict a beautiful future. This was a primitive form of faith that was in a state of confusion and chaos. Light was originally a fundamental energy that existed everywhere in the plane. It had no intelligence or consciousness, and was very ordinary. However, when many holy knights placed their so-called justice, wisdom, faith, and hope on the light would no longer be the light it used to be. In the plane, faith in itself was a powerful force. As the carrier of the holy knight's faith, light became extraordinary, becoming even more divine and powerful. Perhaps the Magi would feel disdain and ridicule the ignorance of the holy knights for using the brainless and unconscious light as the source of their faith. However, the Magi could not deny that the holy knights had indeed obtained power from the holy light, and their inheritance had been passed down. From this aspect, the holy knights actually lived purer lives than the divine spell users of the world of gods, and they obtained more truth. After all, they did not have a god who thirsted for the power of faith above them, nor did they have strict and rigid dogma to restrict their every action. The paladins relied on their devout beliefs and teachings day after day to allow their beliefs to penetrate deeply into the rules of light. Therefore, from a certain point of view, the laws of light in the Envic plane were indeed very different from those in the Magus world. With the help of the power of the holy light, the holy knights passed on their faith to the laws of the plane. In the Envic plane, no matter where you were born or what race you came from, as long as you acknowledged the holy knight's faith from the depths of your body, mind, and soul, you would be able to sense the existence of the holy light through the power of the plane's laws. As for Grim, He had already roamed through 2 worlds with faith, but after killing the believers of the gods, he had never found any remnants of faith similar to the holy light. According to Grimm's deductions, the main reason was that the believers had gods above them. Their souls had long since been branded with the mark of gods. Thus, once they died, the plane's laws would pull them back to the Mother Spirit River, or enter the kingdom of gods through a channel. No matter which one it was impossible to leave the thing formed by the fusion of faith and soul in the material plane. In the kingdom of gods, those who had strong souls and could still entrust their consciousness to the power of faith after death were usually called valiant spirits or holy spirits. In short, they were strange fellows whose souls were unwilling to die and entrusted their remaining power to continue wandering. For such existences, the gods could not wait to guide them into their own countries and use their divine power to shape them so that they could continue to serve the gods in the kingdom of gods. However, in the Envic plane, the holy light that the holy knights believed in had no self-consciousness, so it would not take the initiative to guide the dead valiant spirits or holy spirits back to the source of their faith. That was why the strange, holy light lingered and did not dissipate. This undoubtedly gave Grimm the possibility to intercept the holy light midway. However, the situation today was different. When Grimm carefully incinerated the body of the Golden Knight, the holy light, that was even stronger than the Silver Knight, began to collide with the flame barrier. It was as if some powerful force was summoning it, making it impatient to return. Grimm raised his head and looked in the direction that the holy light wanted to escape to. What he saw was the majestic Holy Light Chapel at the end of the road. Holy Light Chapel? Grimm muttered to himself. According to the memory fragments he extracted from the natives of the plain, the Holy Light Chapel was not only a place for holy knights to live and train, but also a burial place for the fallen holy knight. Perhaps in terms of function, it was similar to the shrines in the world of gods. As a knowledgeable magus, Grimm knew 7 or 8 ways to store souls, even though he was not good at manipulating them. He took out a fist-sized, sparkling, and translucent crystal ball and engraved a dozen runes with different functions on it. These runes were strange. When they were first drawn, they were as bright as day and glowed with magic. However, as they melted into the surface of the crystal ball, they became dark and obscure, and one could barely feel the presence of magic. After he was done with the soul-gathering crystal, Grimm grabbed it and waved it towards the holy light. Under the guidance of a strange force, the holy light trembled and was reluctantly sucked into the crystal ball. Great, I got what I wanted. After retrieving the remaining holy light from the Tier 3 Golden Knight, Grimm straightened his back and looked at the battlefield that was full of devastation. Around him, there were hundreds of corpses of holy knights lying on the ground. Grimm smiled and tied the soul-gathering crystal to his waist with a silver chain. Then, he strode forward. As he strode forward, a silent and transparent fire source swept out in all directions, instantly incinerating the hundreds of corpses into ashes. Among the ashes, streaks of bright and dark holy light appeared and floated towards Grimm's waist like swallows returning to the forest. They silently fused into the soul-gathering crystal. There were 129 corpses, but only 72 streaks of holy light were collected. As for the rest, their souls were either completely destroyed, or their faith in the holy light was not pure enough. In short, not all holy knights could gather holy light after they died. While Grimm was slowly harvesting his spoils of war, the Holy Light Chapel in the distance had turned into a bloodbath. Corpses littered the ground. The remaining holy knights retreated to the chapel and used the door as a barrier. They took out their sturdy shields and defended against the crazy attacks of the elemental magic machines. These little guys were only grade 1 or grade 2, of course, they were no match for the elemental magic machines. However, when they combined their power and formed a strange holy resonance, it was not easy for the elemental magic machines to break through. Thus, both sides were locked in a bloody battle at the door of the Holy Light Chapel. Although the elemental magic machine was killing the low-level holy knights, there were still a lot of ants blocking its way. It was impossible to kill them all. Too slow, I can't wait. After Grimm cleaned up the battlefield, he immediately strode towards the Holy Light Chapel. As he walked, he condensed violent fireballs and threw them at the crowd. Without an opponent of the same rank, the little guys in front of him were nothing but a bunch of ants in front of his 6-meter-tall flaming body. Following the bombardment of fireballs, 20 to 30 paladins fell into the thick smoke and pools of blood in an instant. If it wasn't for the fact that the power of his spells would affect the holy light, Grimm would not have taken these holy knights seriously. They were too weak. In the plain world, being weak was a sin that had to be cleansed with blood and fire. And this was the tradition of the Magi of the Magus world. Chapter 956. The Holy Knights of Hawkins City had fallen into despair. No matter how they resisted, no matter how much they struggled, they could not resist the attacks of the metal monster in front of them. Just as they were using their lives and flesh to delay the enemy's advance, an even larger and more terrifying flame giant rushed forward. Fireballs exploded in the middle of the crowd, forming huge fireballs and ring-shaped shockwaves that burned the Holy Knights black and blue, leaving them with cuts and bruises all over their bodies. Taking advantage of the chaos in their formation, the metal monster roared and charged in. The Holy Knights' line of defense finally collapsed. Grimm walked into the Chapel of Holy Light by stepping on the bodies of the paladins. As he advanced, Grimm sprinkled out scarlet flames, incinerating the bodies of the Holy Knights that died along the way. As for the milky white rays of holy light, they seemed to be attracted to the fist-sized transparent crystal on Grimm's waist as though they were attracted by a magnet. The 2 gates of the Chapel of Light were magnificent and elegant, with some poems praising the holy light engraved on them as well as exquisite decorative patterns. Such a gate was obviously not good at defense. Thus, the elemental magic machine only needed to lightly ram into it before the gate collapsed, crushing some of the holy knights underneath. Amidst the loud noise and flying dust, a few holy knights charged out with their swords raised high, their bodies covered in blood. Unfortunately, their meager strength was nothing in the face of the berserk elemental magic machinery, even if they had more divine halos. The elemental magic machine stepped in and raised its 2 thick metal arms high up, shooting out a string of ice lances, or throwing out a violent energy web, or spewing out a thick stream of high-temperature flames, or flying out tornadoes. Although the magic energy was not as strong as the spells of the Magi, it was endless, and the quantity was astonishing. Thus, with its absolute numbers, it swept away a large number of the stubborn Holy Knight. Occasionally, some Holy Knights raised their shields and charged in front of the elemental magic machine, but before they could display their exquisite combat skills, they were sent flying by the simple iron fists of the elemental magic machine. In the face of absolute power, techniques were so weak that there was almost no room for them to display their skills. Behind the gate was a huge training ground. It was obvious that this was where the Holy Knights trained. Around the training ground were spacious corridors that led to different areas. Among them, the tallest and most majestic chapel was located right in front of the training ground. It was also the place where the Holy Knights meditated and communicated with the Great Holy Light. Usually, it was only open to believers on Sundays, allowing them to pay homage to the warriors who had sacrificed their lives for the sacred cause of the Empire. On the left side of the training ground were rows of tall wooden houses of the same style. At first glance, it was obvious that these were the living quarters of the Holy Knights. There was also a large library and dining hall inside. The right side of the training ground was where the armory, prison, and other large military buildings were located. Apart from the 200 to 300 Holy Knights, there were also more than 200 apprentice knights selected from all over the Empire stationed in this huge chapel of Holy Light. In addition to all kinds of odd-job workers and craftsmen, there were at least 1,000 people. However, when the elemental equipment and Grimm, who had turned into a huge flaming man, rushed into the chapel one after another, Under the cover of the light red flame barrier, ordinary mortals did not even have the chance to make a sound before they were instantly turned into ashes. Only the powerful holy knights could barely resist the burning magic flames with the help of the holy light. However, with their strength, how long could they last in the flame barrier? Hence, as Grimm moved forward, the residences and houses he passed would explode with flames, followed by pieces of flying ash. There was no space for ordinary mortals to survive. The holy knights who ran out of the various buildings in groups shouted and rushed forward, but they were all smashed to the ground by the elemental equipment. Occasionally, there were too many people for the elemental equipment to handle. Grimm, who was leisurely following behind, threw a violent fireball at them, and the whole world instantly became quiet. The difference in strength between the two sides was too great. Even if they were valiant and determined to fight, they could not stop Grimm's footsteps. In just a quarter of an hour, the elemental equipment broke through the last group of holy knights in front of the chapel and smoothly entered the cathedral. There were dozens of injured holy knights lying on the ground. All of them were riddled with injuries and on the verge of death. Most of them had broken limbs and were seriously injured. One look and it was obvious that they were seriously injured and could not be saved. Apart from these injured holy knights, there were also hundreds of mortals hiding in the corners of the cathedral. Looking at the huge metal giants and the terrifying flaming man that looked like the god of destruction, they all hugged each other and shivered. Resist? The power of these invaders from another world was something they could never imagine. Not to mention resisting, they did not even have the power to stand in front of Grimm. Looking at the pale red barrier pressing down on them, everyone's eyes were filled with despair and fear. Some women, children, and the elderly hugged their heads and cried bitterly. The young men and women also clenched their teeth and waited for the arrival of death. Wait a minute! Just when the final fate was about to come, a young holy knight wearing exquisite half-body armor suddenly stood up and pulled out a greatsword that was almost as tall as herself. She pointed it at Grimm and shouted, "Demon, you want us, not these mortals. As long as you let these mortals go, we are willing to give up resistance." The young holy knight's voice was clear and loud, with a hint of a young girl's voice that had not faded. As she gently took off the mask on her face, a young and tender face was revealed. It was filled with determination and pain. A little apprentice knight, although she had gathered her courage to stand in front of the elemental equipment and Grimm, her greatsword was slightly trembling, showing that she was not calm. With Grimm's 6-meter-tall body, no matter how big the cathedral was, it would not be easy for him to enter and exit. Therefore, Grimm's body was covered in flames, and a huge human-shaped passage was formed on the side of the cathedral. Only then did he take large strides in. At this moment, looking at the little apprentice knight blocking in front of him, Grimm could not help but chuckle. He slightly lowered his body, and the flames in his eyes condensed. A stream of crimson flames struck the greatsword that the girl held high, and in an instant, only a short section of it was left. The girl cried out in surprise, and the bright red sword in her hand fell to the ground. The wooden floor beneath her feet was scorched, and black smoke was coming out of it. Facing the terrifying flaming man in front of her, the girl's frail body trembled slightly. Because she was too close to him, she could even feel the strange sensation of the flames on the giant's body licking her hair and armor. In such an environment, every time the girl breathed, what she inhaled was no longer sweet air, but a stream of high temperature that could corrode bones and corrode flesh. Her nose was on fire, and her chest was burning. Her entire body could feel the intense burning sensation. The girl's face was flushed red, and she could barely breathe. Looking at the situation in the cathedral again, Grimm stopped in his tracks, and began to slowly retract the overflowing flame energy in his body. The temperature within 10 meters of him immediately dropped from a terrifying 3,000 degrees to 1,200 degrees. Although it had dropped a lot, it was still fatal to mortals who lacked protection. "Life should not be wasted like this," Grimm said in a low voice, You can leave with these mortals. Anyone below iron rank can leave. I'll only give you 3 minutes. Grim spoke in the common language of zombies, and the mortals hiding in the corner stopped crying when they heard him. Their faces were once again filled with hope. 3 minutes. You only have 3 minutes. Once the time is up, everyone here must die. Hearing the roar of the flame giant again, the odd job workers, craftsmen, and ordinary people in the corner looked at each other. They did not know if they should believe the words of this demon from another world. Finally, a middle-aged man plucked up his courage and carefully bypassed Lord Gao. He did not start running until he had walked out of the cathedral. With this, the rest of the people finally remembered that time was pressing. They supported each other and clustered around each other. They walked past Grim in fear and escaped from the cathedral. It was only after Grim withdrew his flame barrier and restrained the overflowing flame energy in his body that they were able to escape. Otherwise, with the power of a grade 3 fire wizard, he could kill everyone in the cathedral with just his overflowing energy without using any spells. Grim was not a bloodthirsty person. The reason why he slaughtered the holy knights was for the strange holy light that they condensed after their death. As long as those mortals did not hinder him, there was no need for him to kill them. It was the same reason why he let those guys below Black Iron Knight leave. These guys had not leveled up yet, so it was impossible for their bodies to produce enough holy light energy. Therefore, Grim would not gain anything by killing them, so he did not mind letting them go. As for whether or not the other party would continue to oppose him after escaping, Grim had never considered this. In front of him, even a grade 3 golden knight would have to suffer a grievance. What harm would a bunch of little fellows who hadn't even reached grade 1 bring to him if they were dead or alive? No, I will not leave. Although she was trembling in fear, the girl still persisted. My life belongs to the holy light. I am willing to sacrifice myself for it. Chapter 957. No, wait a minute. A holy knight who had half of his body burnt to a crisp used his remaining right arm to support his body and shouted, "Catherine, let's leave. The holy light teaches us to be brave and sacrifice, but it must be worthwhile. If you don't take the lead and leave, I'm afraid they will have to stay like you." Judging from his armor and clothing, he was a grade 2 silver tier knight. However, compared to the injured people around him, his injuries were undoubtedly the heaviest. He was on the verge of death, and even his voice was hoarse and low. The young lady, Catherine, was taken aback when she heard that. She looked around and realized that close to 100 apprentice knights like her were slowly gathering around them, blocking the injured people. Their eyes were filled with fear, and confusion, but more than that, there was a determination that they had never seen before. Bring them away. Pass on the holy light forever. We cannot let the holy light of the northern prefecture be extinguished. The grade 2 silver tier knight shouted until his voice was hoarse, and he could no longer continue. Time ticked by. This apprentice knight named Catherine had never experienced such a heart-wrenching and painful choice before. Seeing that the time set by the terrifying flame giant was about to arrive, she finally clenched her teeth and said, "Let's go." After saying that, she took the lead and walked towards the human-shaped hole in the ground. The rest of the apprentice knights looked at each other and finally followed her. "What the hell is he doing? He's making me look like a demon king," Grim grumbled in his heart. He did not realize that his current appearance and actions were no different from the terrifying demon king in the night novels. Grim was not interested in killing these apprentice knights that he could not extract any value from. The glaring fire elemental energy that was gathered in his hand suddenly turned into a huge flame ring and spread on the bodies of the apprentice knights. The apprentice knights who had just reached the door suddenly became nervous. They all thought that the flame giant was going to change his mind. However, the flaming halo didn't cause them any harm even though it was on the surface of their bodies. "You can leave now," Grim said in a muffled voice. "This flame ring has the scent of my soul. With it, you will not be attacked by the dragons, flame tigers, and flame creatures. Remember, leave this city immediately. Do not stay in any place. This flame ring will only last for a quarter of an hour." Hearing that, the apprentice knights looked at each other. They did not know if they should hate the evil flame giant or thank him. Their expressions were complicated, and they looked at each other in confusion. Finally, they slowly left. However, what they did not know was that when the flame ring covered Catherine's body, a small flame rune landed on her shoulder. It flickered for a while, and then disappeared mysteriously. She did not know what happened. Seeing this group of little guys slowly leaving, Grim could not help but reveal an inexplicable smile on his flaming face. Although he did not care about these little fellows, it did not mean that he did not know what they were doing in the dark. There were a few special people mixed in with the group of commoners that had left first. Although they had changed into commoner clothes, the AI chip's full-screen analysis revealed their gorgeous and exquisite silk undergarments, as well as the seals and documents they had hidden in their robes. From the looks of it, they seemed to be important people in Hawkins City. They were probably the city lord or the governor. If Grim was the Thunder Dragon Arms, he would definitely take them down. This way, robbing the city's treasury would be much faster and more convenient. It was a pity that Grim did not care about the worldly treasures, but the holy knights in front of him. Therefore, he didn't stop those guys from escaping in a panic among the crowd. As for letting these apprentice knights go, other than not wanting to cause a senseless massacre, he wanted to know where they were going. Now that he had taken down the largest church of Holy Light in the northern region, Grim's next step was to quickly sweep through the smaller churches in the surrounding cities. However, the Zambi's empire was a large country with a vast territory, a powerful army, and many holy knights. Although he had taken down a large city by surprise, it did not mean that they did not have the ability to retaliate. If the enemy mobilized a large group of high-ranked holy knights, 2 or 3 gold knights would be enough to make Grim leave empty-handed. If things went awry, Grim would have to think of ways to avoid being hunted down by the enemy. After all, this was a foreign plane filled with hostility. As long as he did not meet the 2 Grade 4 knights, Grim's Grade 3 strength was enough to make him invincible. However, he still had to be careful of the terrifying traps that the natives of this plane had dug for him. Once he was lured into a trap, he would be surrounded and attacked by multiple opponents of the same rank. Even with Grim's strength and arrogance, there was a possibility that he would fall here. Hence, it was very rare to get some information about the Holy Knight. Although this little girl called Catherine was not very strong, she had a firm heart and was pure. She was a good seedling for the path of a holy knight. After this training, she might be taken in as a disciple by a high-ranked holy knight. This way, Grim could use her as a medium to get some information about the internal movements of the holy knight. It was not just Catherine. Among the apprentice knights who left, Grim had secretly planted some flame runes on the bodies of those who had a basic foundation. These flame runes were usually hidden, and would not affect the host at all. However, as long as the host's consciousness was focused on Grim, he would be able to notice them even if they were thousands of miles away. These flame runes were actually related to transfiguration, spiritual energy, curses, and many other sorcery disciplines. Grim had only just grasped this knowledge after advancing to Grade 3. After all the small fries had left, the cathedral finally quieted down. Only the heavily injured holy knights and a few extremely devout believers of the holy light were left. Grim did not waste any more time. With a wave of his hand, a huge wave of flames surged out and instantly burned everything inside to ashes. After successfully harvesting another 100 rays of holy light, Grim licked his lips in satisfaction and looked down at his feet. Here. Dig down. Under his command, the powerful elemental magic machine temporarily transformed into a construction machine and dug a huge pit in the center of the charred church floor, one punch after another. When the excavation reached a depth of 5 meters, The heavy elemental magic equipment fell into a huge cave along with the collapse of the earth and rock. Grimm was not surprised by this. After a few chants, his huge flame body began to shrink rapidly and finally returned to his human form. The burning corona, the flame emblem, the fire dragon pendant, the ash boots, the fearless belt, and a dark red sorcerer's robe appeared on his body one after another, emitting a faint red glow. Grimm then jumped into the big hole and slowly floated down to the bottom. It was a simple and crude large tomb. The walls around it had been dug out into a square lattice of 1 meter in diameter. Each lattice had a skeleton wrapped in a grayish-white burial cloth. In some of the small compartments, there were some ancient armors or weapons that had lost their metallic luster scattered about. There was not a single jewel in the entire tomb, nor was there any exquisite artwork. As far as the eye could see, it looked like an antique market that had been covered in dust for a long time. Everything was covered in dust and layers of cobwebs, making it difficult to see what was underneath. The elemental magic machine poured down with tons of rock fragments and gravel, turning a corner of the tomb into a mess. Countless bones slid out of the collapsed lattices and scattered all over the ground. After seeing what was inside, Grimm slightly frowned. He didn't have the patience to search for the treasures here one by one. Thus, he waved his hand again, and a huge flame shockwave began to sweep across the entire tomb unscrupulously. Anything that could survive for thousands of years must be good, and anything that could withstand the fire without being destroyed was also good. As for whether any rare knight's writing or ancient scrolls would be destroyed in the fire, it was not something that Grimm needed to worry about. Under the repeated scouring of the flame ripples, the spider webs turned into ashes, the dust crystallized, the bones were incinerated, and the metal melted. When these miscellaneous items turned into ashes one by one, the real treasures that were hidden underneath were finally revealed. It could be a piece of bone that was not afraid of flames, a piece of shiny metal ore, a magic longsword that was emitting a faint fluorescent light, or a strange shield with a dull luster. However, none of these could attract Grimm's attention. His gaze was firmly fixed on the strange coffin in the middle of the tomb. It was a giant coffin made of an unknown metal. It was quietly placed in the center of the tomb. There were some complicated and exquisite patterns carved on it. It was rare to see such a thing among the holy knights, who always advocated simplicity. In this huge tomb, even the Grade 2 and Grade 3 holy knights would be wrapped in a thin layer of cloth and placed in the tomb's lattice after they died. At the very least, there were some swords, shields, or armors that they used when they were alive. However, this holy knight had the qualifications to enjoy such treatment, which showed that he was different from the others. Chapter 958. Grade 4. It's definitely Grade 4. Under Grimm's command, the elemental magic machine strode towards the exquisite coffin and pushed the lid to one side. A cold, decaying aura gushed out from the coffin, causing the temperature in the catacombs to plummet. If this wasn't the Chapel of Light, Grimm would have to be careful of the possibility of this Grade 4 corpse mutating. In the planar world, Grade 4 was the limit of strength for most planes. At this level, one only needed to take one more step and they would be one step away from immortality. That was why Grade 4 knights who had reached the end of their lifespan would usually bury their corpses. If they did not take any precautions, with the powerful bodies and minds of Grade 4 creatures, there was almost a 100% chance that they would turn into undead creatures after death. That was why the Zam's Empire stored most of the corpses of the holy knights in the catacombs of the Chapel of Light, relying on the pure holy light to prevent their corpses from turning into powerful undead. As for the memorial and remembrance that was announced to the outside world, it was just a cover-up. Lying in the coffin was a middle-aged man with a rough face and a purple-gold complexion. He was wearing a golden full-body armor, and a strange shield with a golden flying lion engraved on it was placed upside down on his body. There was also a strange-looking long sword placed on his side. Although this Tier 4 Holy Knight had been dead for several hundred years, his skin and appearance were still vivid and lifelike. At a glance, the Holy Knight looked as if he was taking a nap. It was impossible to tell that he was already dead. Grimm's black pupils flickered with a blue light as he quickly scanned the corpse of the Grade 4 Holy Knight. He could not sense any trace of soul in the corpse, but the strength of the body was still intact. If a necromancer saw such a well-preserved Grade 4 corpse, they would definitely be ecstatic. However, Grimm was not an expert in necromancy, so he could not turn this corpse into a powerful undead. That was why he needed to think about how to maximize its value. Grimm carefully reached out to touch the Grade 4 corpse and silently chanted the activation incantation, intending to store it in his storage ring. However, when a faint spatial fluctuation enveloped the corpse, an overflowing magical energy actually stopped Grimm's action. What's going on? Grimm narrowed his eyes and quickly found the source of the accident by following the fluctuations of magical energy. Grimm found a magic ring embedded with a large white crystal on the pinky finger of the Grade 4 corpse. Even though it had gone through hundreds of years of silence and vicissitudes, it was still glistening with magical power and radiance. With a single glance, one could tell that it was no ordinary object. Not to mention the magic ring, even the armor and weapons on the entire corpse were shining with a purple light. Based on the residual energy levels of these magic items, Grimm was certain that they were all Tier 4 magic equipment. It didn't matter if Grimm could use them or not. If he brought them back to the sorcerer world, they would definitely be worth a fortune. Grimm carefully removed the white crystal ring from the finger of the corpse and held it up in front of his eyes to examine it. Beep, a high-energy magic item has been discovered. Would you like to perform a deep scan? Let's scan. For ordinary magic rings, they either stored some kind of special spell or could be used to enhance the user's status. However, the magic ring in front of him was Tier 4, and the power it contained was naturally not something an ordinary magic ring could compare to. However, before he could analyze it, Grimm obviously could not use it. With a strange buzzing sound, Grimm felt his spiritual force rapidly deplete. Finally, after a quarter of an hour, the AI chip stopped scanning and analyzing. Beep. Deep scan completed. The magic item's basic data is as follows. Item name: Sodden's Holy Ring. Item grade: Tier 4. Item attributes: +5 strength, +3 vitality, +1 agility. The special properties: this is the magic ring that the Tier 4 Holy Knight Sodden loved when he was alive. It possesses indescribable power. According to the wearer's will, it can transform any energy into the purest holy light. When the wearer attacks an enemy, it can add 400 degrees of holy damage. It ignores defense and magic resistance. Grimm's eyes widened as he stared at the stats of the magic ring projected in his mind by the AI chip. His entire body could not help but tremble. Damn it, as expected of a Tier 4 magic ring. Not to mention the additional stats, just the last special property alone was extremely powerful. Every attack had an additional 400 degrees of holy damage. This terrifying power even surpassed most of Grimm's Tier 3 spells. The problem now was that he did not know if this additional damage was only effective against melee attacks or long-range spells. If it was effective against long-range spells as well, then it would be equivalent to Grimm's spell strength increasing by 400 degrees. Moreover, it was the unpopular holy attribute that ignored defense and magic resistance. Grimm held the Ring of Sodden in his hands and kissed it for a long time before he happily put it on his right pinky finger. With it, Grimm immediately let the AI chip scan his basic stats again. Grimm, Basic Tier 3 Class Identity. Elemental Wizard, Flame Mastery, Basic Attributes. Strength 18 + 7, Constitution 21 + 4, Agility 11 + 2, Vitality 32 + 4. Class Skills. Body of Fire, Body of Flame Demon. Now, even if Grimm did not transform into a Balrog, He still had 25 points of strength and 25 points of vitality. With this kind of physical strength, he could even fight a Tier 2 Silver Knight barehanded without being at a disadvantage. Even without the protection of spells, his body could withstand the full-powered attack of a Tier 1 fighter. After taking off the Ring of Sodden, the Tier 4 corpse no longer resisted the spatial fluctuations of the storage ring. After storing all the items and corpses in the coffin into the storage ring, Grimm finally relaxed and began to collect the items that were not destroyed by the flame blast. It was a rare harvest. The magical items in the Great Catacomb almost completely filled up Grimm's storage ring. After making sure that he did not miss anything, Grimm brought the elemental magic machine back to the surface. Grimm stayed in the Great Catacomb for a whole 2 hours. When he stepped out of the cathedral and soared into the sky, he realized that the Thunder Dragon arms and the Flaming Tiger Sindar were nowhere to be found. After all, they were summoned from another world by Grimm through a magic contract. It was impossible for them to stay in the Invik realm for too long. Once the summoning time was up, they would return to their original realm under the restriction of the power of witchcraft. Therefore, Grimm did not find it strange that they had disappeared. Hovering high in the sky, Grimm could clearly see that the once beautiful and peaceful city was now in ruins. Earlier on, the Type 3 powerhouses had engaged in a frenzied battle, destroying 3 streets and a large number of buildings in the city center. As for the flame gate that Grimm summoned, it released thousands of otherworld flame creatures. Grimm did not impose any restrictions on the flaming creatures, so they treated the human city as a place to roam and explore. They wandered aimlessly in Harkenth City. Due to the hatred of life and the instinct of the flame creatures, wherever they went, they spread flames and slaughtered all living beings. Therefore, the flame creatures were the ones that caused the most damage to the city. As for the Tier 3 Thunder Dragon arms and the Flaming Tiger Sindar, they were only here to seek wealth. As long as the humans did not block their way to the treasury, they did not have the time to slaughter them. However, Grimm could clearly see from the sky that the luxurious city lord's mansion in the distance was already billowing with black smoke. Large parts of the building had their roofs dug out, and many storehouses had collapsed. It was a miserable sight to behold. As for the commercial district on the other side of the city, it was also on fire, looking like it had been burnt to the top. Grimm shook his head and sighed. He did not dare to stay here for too long. He put away his elemental equipment and summoned a Grade 1 rock python, which burrowed into the ground and disappeared. Magus World, Tower of Destiny. On the astrological platform at the top of the tower. Even in the afternoon, when the sun was the brightest, the place was still dark. The dome was filled with faint starlight, and the entire hall was so dark that it made one's heart palpitate. Alice was still sitting in front of the wooden table. She was wearing a starry robe, and her long silky hair was hanging loosely behind her back. She was arranging the tarot cards in her hand as she pleased, and at the same time she was whispering to the shadow in the magic mirror in a gentle and pleasant manner. Looking at their intimate and warm attitude, outsiders who did not know the truth would think that they were best friends. "It's been a month. How's the situation on your side?" Alice shuffled the cards while pursing her lips. "But why do I feel that the life force of the guy you sent is getting weaker? Could it be that those natives seized the opportunity to encircle and annihilate him?" Listening to Alice's sarcasm, the shadow in the magic mirror didn't say a word. He just stared at her coldly through the mirror. The power of destiny was strange and unpredictable. It did not rely on one's basic strength like other domains. For physique refinement sorcerers, the stronger one's strength and constitution would give them a greater advantage in battle. The same principle applied to elemental sorcerers. However, elemental sorcerers valued the strength of their mental strength more. For these two witches of destiny, strength would only allow them to scheme more and more, but it would not help in the competition of destiny. Chapter 959. The Witches of Destiny were a very strange and mysterious profession. They were not suited for direct combat due to their great power. Hence, they often hid behind the scenes like unscrupulous voyeurs, borrowing the power of the River of Destiny to conceal their existence or their actions. Moreover, borrowing the power of destiny to attack an opponent required so many considerations that it left one in despair. Hence, when two Witches of Destiny were hostile towards each other, the only thing they could do was to push each other into the vortex of destiny and borrow the power of destiny to kill each other. However, since Alice already knew of the existence of the first Witch of Destiny, how could she give her such a chance? These days, Alice almost never took a step out of the Tower of Destiny. With the protection of the Sorcerer World's plane consciousness, the terrifying first Witch of Destiny could not find the slightest opportunity to strike. Ever since Alice retrieved the divine artifact Scepter of Prophecy from the Farron Plane, the first Witch of Destiny could not enter the Sorcerer World with her main body, and thus lost control of Alice's destiny. This time, the Invic Plane had become a treacherous battlefield where the two Witches of Destiny desperately tried to control their power. Alice had the protection of the plane's consciousness, while the mysterious first Witch of Destiny had many backups and hidden forces. Hence, with the two of them adding fuel to the fire, the situation in the distant Invic Plane became increasingly chaotic. This was a wild beast cave located 70 miles west of Hawkins City. At this moment, the violent Earth Bear family of 5 that had been occupying the huge cave had turned into bloody corpses. They had been skinned by Katie and roasted over a burning bonfire. Katie tore at the bear meat in her mouth with all her might, gritting her teeth as if they were the hateful creatures she hated the most. In the blink of an eye, tens of kilograms of bear meat had entered her stomach, but Katie was still hungry. In order to digest and absorb energy faster and more conveniently, Katie's stomach had undergone some changes. Not to mention normal food, even the abnormally hard crystal cores of magical beasts or pure energy magic crystals could be crushed, melted, and completely digested and absorbed by her modified stomach. As a high-grade machinist, Katie's body was able to digest and absorb food at an insane rate. Ordinary humans could only absorb 10% to 20% of the nutrients in their food, but Katie could absorb up to 80%. This also meant that Katie could obtain more energy than others by eating the same food. Unfortunately, even after eating a few dozen kilograms of bear meat, Katie's energy index, which was close to the red warning line, was still low. However, the energy from the food she absorbed was quickly converted into the flesh and blood energy that this body needed. It began to continuously stimulate and repair the charred skin on the surface of her body. As Katie sat by the bonfire and gobbled down the food, her body crackled with the rapid growth of her muscle fibers. The charred flesh and skin on the surface of his body began to fall off, revealing the bright red flesh that was constantly squirming and growing. Damage to mechanical components could be repaired through mechanical spells, but the loss of flesh and blood could only be repaired through large amounts of food. Previously in Hawkins City, in order to escape from Fire Wizard Grimm and Flaming Tiger's pincer attack, she had no choice but to use her desperate skill, Blade Storm. This, without a doubt, aggravated her original injuries. Hence, after Katie escaped from Hawkins City and ran here in one go, she fell into a frenzy of eating. Just when she was barely able to stop the injuries on her body from worsening, a strange croaking sound suddenly came from her bosom. Katie's expression stiffened, and she threw the half-eaten bear paw to the side. She reached into her bosom and took out a black crystal the size of a fist. Katie tossed the black crystal into the air, and 2 scarlet rays shot out from her eyes, hitting the crystal. The strange black crystal immediately began to spin slowly. Without a sound, the cave that had been illuminated by the bonfire suddenly became dark and deep, as if it was suddenly enveloped by night. Everything around it disappeared without a trace, leaving only a faint black figure. "How's my work?" Like a phonograph running out of battery, the black figure's voice was intermittent, as if it had been greatly disrupted. Lady Destiny, you've found me a good mission. Katie sneered. The information you provided said that he was a newly advanced rank 3 elemental magus, but you didn't mention that he had a powerful rank 3 puppet and a rank 3 flame creature from another plane. With such strength, are you planning to send me to my death? Katie had retreated too early during the battle at Hawkins City, and did not get to see Arm's figure with her own eyes. Had she done so, she would have been twice as furious as before. As a mechanical magus who specialized in close combat, she had an 80% chance of winning against an elemental magus of the same rank. However, that was only under normal circumstances. If she had known that her opponent could summon multiple grade 3 helpers so easily, she would not have come to this remote plane to die, no matter how many benefits the Witch of Destiny had promised her. Thus, when she suddenly saw the mastermind behind the scenes, all the depression and anger she had accumulated over the past few days exploded in an instant. As if enraged by Katie's unruly attitude, the figure in the dark suddenly shot out a cold and sullen gaze. Shortly after, a weak spiritual message flowed into Katie's mind. Katie, I don't want to talk nonsense with you. I'm using the power of destiny to get rid of that little slut's interference to talk to you. Time is precious. Your incompetence has already disappointed me. As an old magus who has advanced for 300 years, you can't even defeat a kid who has advanced for less than 30 years. How can you blame me for this? It's clearly the problem with the information you provided. That kid can easily summon 2 or 3 helpers of the same rank. How am I supposed to fight him? Humph, I've already investigated the situation you mentioned. There is indeed something strange about that kid that even my perception of destiny can't see through. Therefore, we need to change our previous plan. Immediately lead Natagu and the other 2 into the Envik plane. They will take over the mission of killing that kid. As for you, immediately kill the witch who is carrying the core of the long-distance teleportation spell formation. Do not let her send it to the witch tower. You want to trap that wizard in this plane? Katie asked hesitantly. But after the mission is completed, how are we going to return to our own planes? Humph, that's not something you need to worry about. The black figure said coldly, when Natagu teleports over, I'll ask him to bring you a temporary interplane teleportation spell formation. It'll be enough for the 4 of you to return smoothly. Katie thought for a moment and felt that there were no more problems, so she nodded in agreement. She did not look for a more suitable spot, and immediately began to carve a giant spell formation that had a diameter of 10 meters on the ground of the cave. Originally, with Katie's knowledge of witchcraft, it was impossible for her to grasp such high-level knowledge of teleportation spells. But she couldn't resist the fact that there was a witch of destiny who was at the level of a great wizard pointing fingers at her. Even so, it took Katie half a day to carve the basic template of the teleportation spell formation on the ground. Normally, a regular witchcraft teleportation spell formation should be built in an area with abundant energy, first solidifying and leveling the ground, and then using professional methods to carve a standard teleportation spell formation. Tens of thousands of runes and magic lines needed to be drawn, and the angle and direction could not be the slightest bit off. If there was a slight mistake, the teleportation spell formation would fail, and the person being teleported would be stranded in an unknown, mysterious place. With the cave in front of them, it was obvious that it did not meet all the requirements. After all, Katie was not a professional spell formation master, so the teleportation spell formation she had drawn herself was simply crude and despicable. If someone really dared to use such a teleportation spell formation to teleport across planes, they might not even know how they died. However, there was a powerful witch of destiny behind Katie. With just a little bit of destiny force, this teleportation spell formation with a success rate of less than 7% successfully teleported 3 magi. The milky white teleportation light slowly receded in the cave, and a cloud of choking smoke and dust fell on the 3 powerful magi. In order to prevent their elemental shields from interfering with the accuracy of the teleportation, the three magi did not use any defensive spells. They relied purely on their strong bodies to endure the entire process. However, they did not expect that the teleportation location was not some open platform, nor was it some tightly secured teleportation room. Instead, it was a simple cave with a burning bonfire. In order to reduce the burden of teleportation, the Great Witch in Katie's mind had even removed the defensive spells around the teleportation spell formation. Therefore, the ripples of the teleportation caused a whirlwind of smoke and dust to swirl together, causing the three magi who had just recovered from the dizziness to be at a disadvantage. After a series of violent coughs, the three magi crawled out of the teleportation spell formation with ashen faces. Chapter 960. You guys must have mocked me before coming here. That's my answer. Katie was obviously acquainted with the three new magi, and she retorted proudly. There were three new magi, one male and two females. The one leading them was a male magus. He wore a long purple robe, but he had a snake's head. Whenever he spoke, his tongue flicked in and out, and the sharp hissing made it hard for others to understand what he was saying. On the snake's head was a pair of strange green vertical pupils that flickered with a cold glint. He was a giant serpent magus who had manifested his origin bloodline. As for the other two females, one had a head full of white hair and a face full of wrinkles and age spots. She wore a black magus robe, and she held a pitch-black wooden stick that was taller than her. Her back was bent at a 90-degree angle. The other one had a charming and adorable appearance. She was dressed in a very sexy outfit, and there was a purple crystal embedded in the middle of her forehead. Every move she made had a thick, irresistible charm to it. As they coughed violently, the three of them came out of the thick smoke and dust. No matter what they looked like before, their faces were now black, and their bodies were covered in dust and ash. "Katie, you bastard, you've dirted my face." The charming female magus seemed to value her own beauty, and her anger was twice that of her two companions. As she shouted, the purple crystal on the beautiful female magus' forehead released a formless ripple, causing the other three to become absent-minded. In their eyes, this young witch's every frown and smile, her anger and anger were all so soul-stirring, all so heart-wrenching. If they could gain her favor and have a good time with her, it would be worth it even if they had to die now. However, she only managed to break free after a second. Katie let out a cold snort and spread her hands apart. Two sharp metal spikes suddenly appeared in her palms. "Benigia, you slut, if you dare use your mind spell on me again, I'll kill you." The young witch called Berija had a faint smile on her face. The purple crystal on her forehead was overflowing with layers of fine and solid psionic barriers, completely protecting herself. "Want to kill me? Come on, let's see who kills who." The other old woman smiled sinisterly and quietly moved to the side, looking as if she would not help either side. The giant serpent wizard took a step forward and stood between Katie and the young witch, his body suddenly condensing a cold and brutal aura. His witchcraft energy was stirred up by his origin bloodline, and an 8-meter-long, terrifying serpent covered in indigo scales appeared above his head. "Enough. Retract your witchcraft. Don't forget, we're not here to fight amongst ourselves, but to complete the mission given to us by that lord. Before the mission is completed, no one is allowed to attack their own people. Otherwise, it had to be said that bloodline magi were much more tyrannical than magi of other lineages. Not to mention anything else, just this hand of his allowed him to rely on the terrifying strength of his giant snake form to firmly suppress the few magi present. From the energy emanating from his body, it could be seen that even if he had not reached the peak of rank 3, he was not far from it. As for the two female magi, the old and ugly one was called Guinevere. She was adept at using poison and had the strength of a mid-rank 3 magus. The young and beautiful one was called Benigia. She was adept at mind spells and had the strength of a mid-rank 3 magus. If such a team gathered together, if they could really work together seamlessly, the combat strength they could display was simply unimaginable to outsiders. However, just like the nature of sorcerers, every sorcerer was a selfish, cunning, and cruel fellow, wanting them to give up all their prejudices and fight side by side. That was practically a delusion. The three magi had just entered the Envic plane, and their bodies were under the terrifying pressure of the plane. Hence, they were not in a hurry to act. Instead, they gathered together to listen to Katie talk about her experiences in the past month, as well as the basic situation of their target. At first, the three magi were skeptical of Katie's description of the young fire magus. They thought that she must have overestimated his strength after suffering a huge loss. However, when their gazes landed on the scorch marks on Katie's body, they could not help but feel bewildered. How could a young man who had only ascended to the Heavenly Dipper stage 20 or 30 years ago hurt Katie so badly? A powerful rank 3 elemental magic machine. What was that? A new steel puppet from the Silver Alliance? A rank 3 flame tiger summoned from the fire elemental plane. That was a possibility. After all, fire magi were more popular in the fire elemental plane. It was conceivable that they could establish a small base there and make friends with some flame lords. However, this kind of flame summoning usually did not last too long. Before coming here, they had brought some banished spell scrolls with them, which were the most useful to deal with summoned creatures from another plane. As for Gweneville, she was interested in the Fire Witch's pet, the Plague Poison Spirit, which was described by Katie. She suspected that the Plague Spirit might be the primary form of some powerful soul equipment. If she could restrain the Fire Magus, she would not be in a hurry to kill him. Instead, she could think of a way to extract the Plague Spirit from his soul. Then, she might have the chance to study or experience the wonders of a soul equipment. Things like soul equipment were extremely rare even for high-ranked magi, especially those that were compatible with their soul origin and elemental talents. They could only be found by chance. Now that she suddenly heard that her target had a poisonous soul equipment, Guinevere's old and withered heart could not help but beat violently again. On the other hand, Benigia, who was born with an innate charm, focused her attention on the appearance of the young wizard. When she thought about how her enemy was a young, handsome, and powerful wizard, Benigia felt her body heat up, and she could not help but tremble slightly. She tightly clamped her legs together, and couldn't help but rub them together. Her eyes were burning with passion, and she looked like she couldn't wait to seduce the other party. Although Benigia looked like a slut, she was a typical black-hearted and ruthless widow. She liked to seduce and charm powerful wizards, and then implant a vicious spiritual seed in their sea of consciousness when their minds were in a trance. This way, the spiritual power that the man had painstakingly obtained through meditation would be transferred to Benigia without him knowing. As for the mental power that was sucked by Benigia, it could not be recovered through meditation and sleep. This meant that the limit of the unlucky guy's spiritual power was permanently lowered. After a simple explanation of the situation, Katie left the cave without hesitation. The task of hunting down the fire wizard Grimm was handed over to the 3 new wizards, and Katie only had to deal with a rank 2 witch. She was overjoyed to have such an easy task. In the depths of her heart, Katie was secretly imagining the scene of her 3 companions meeting with Grimm. If these 3 idiots were as arrogant as they had been when they had first arrived, they would have suffered a great loss. I'm saying if that bitch Benigia dies on the battlefield, that would be the most satisfying thing for me. While her imagination ran wild, Katie followed the instructions of the great wizard and sneaked towards the southwest of the Zambes Empire. Due to the interference of fate, the great wizard could not find Witch-Rena's exact location, but he still had a vague direction, which prevented Katie from running around aimlessly in the Zambes Empire. Witch-Rena was not very powerful, but she was still a deceitful witch. If she wanted to hide, Katie would not be able to find her even if she was a rank higher than her. However, with the great wizard's intermittent guidance, it was not difficult to find her. Therefore, Katie's heart was completely relaxed. However, as Katie passed through forests and streams with a smile on her face, she suddenly stopped on a cliff in a dense forest. Not far away, the trees swayed, and a large group of people wearing simple armor, waving their swords to cut down the branches in their way, happened to bump into her. Holy Knights! Why did she meet a group of Holy Knights here? Katie's mouth twitched uncontrollably. Was her bad luck not over yet? A witch, she's a witch. It was obvious that Katie's strange form could not be hidden from the eyes of the Holy Knights, who had seen a lot of things and recognized her immediately. When enemies met, their eyes turned red. The Holy Knights immediately raised their swords and shields and fanned out to surround Katie. Katie gripped the metal prongs in her hands with a sinister smile, her scarlet mechanical eyes flashing with a thirst for slaughter. After a brief scan, she sensed that the strongest among this group of 30 to 40 Holy Knights were only 2 Silver Knights, Grade 2, while the rest were Black Iron Knights, Grade 1. In her eyes, these people were just small fries that could be easily killed. Although she had lost a large number of her metal wheels in the battle with Harkenth, her body had also suffered great damage. However, taking care of these small fries was not a problem. More importantly, she could use this massacre to release the resentment and grievance that had accumulated in the wizard's body. But just as Katie was about to make her move, the forest behind the Holy Knights parted, and another knight slowly walked out. Katie's scarlet mechanical eyes swept across his body, and she immediately felt a piercing pain from the dazzling energy. Her mechanical heart immediately started beating rapidly. Chapter 961. This place used to be a dark and damp cave. However, after some simple modifications by Grimm, it had become a simple and comfortable underground palace. After leaving Hawkins City, Grimm had found a safe place nearby. He used his rock python to burrow 30 meters underground, and only then did he manage to dig out a simple cave that was 50 square meters in size. As for the moisture that was everywhere underground, a high-temperature barrier turned the damp soil into hard rock. Grimm then took out a illumination stone and embedded it into the ceiling of the cave. After infusing some mana into it, the place became bright. Releasing elemental magic equipment to act as sentries, Grimm created a stone bed in a corner of the cave. He laid on it with his clothes on and fell into a deep sleep. It had been 37 days since he entered the Envik Plain. Over the past month, Grimm had been harassed by the annoying dagger lady and had not really slept at all. He had not even gone into deep meditation. Although he was a Grade 3 magus and his body was comparable to most magical creatures, it was inevitable that he would be mentally exhausted. The continuous days of running around, the mental backlash from the destruction of his fire clone, and the huge mental toll from the battle at Harkenth City had all added up to make Grimm somewhat exhausted. As soon as the safe zone was set up, he fell asleep without saying a word, directly falling into the deepest sleep he had ever experienced. It had to be said that for humans, sleep was the best way to relieve fatigue and mental stress. After Black Sweet's sleep, Grimm slowly woke up from his slumber after his mental exhaustion had completely disappeared. He sat up in a daze, yawning and stretching his body. Grimm shook his head lightly and finally regained consciousness. Chip, how long did I sleep? 40 hours 37 minutes 52 seconds, ugh. So long. Grimm rubbed his rumbling stomach and smiled wryly. No wonder I feel so hungry. With the physique of a Grade 3 magus, he would not feel hungry even if he did not eat for more than a month. The only reason why Grimm felt this way was because he had used up too much of his energy. The Balrog's heart that he had implanted when he was at Grade 1 was only a Grade 2 magic organ. The Balrog's heart that he had implanted when he was at Grade 1 was no more than a Grade 2 magic organ. Even when Grimm was weak, the Balrog's heart had given him a huge boost in energy output and strength. Now that Grimm had advanced to Grade 3, The fire spells he could cast were at least 400 to 500 degrees. This level of energy was not something that the Grade 2 Balrog's heart could handle. The Balrog transformation also did not give Grim as much of a boost to his battle strength as before. When facing Tier 3 enemies, the Flame Demon transformation, which had helped him defeat powerful enemies multiple times, had degenerated into a relatively useless ability. On the contrary, it wasn't as flexible as the flame body. It was precisely because the Balrog's heart was not strong enough that Grim's heart became weak. He could no longer intimidate everyone with his terrifying strength. If he did not need to fight, the energy output from the Balrog's heart would be enough to satisfy Grim's needs. However, when he was in an intense battle, the energy output from the Balrog's heart would not be enough. Grim would need to expend a large amount of spiritual force to gather the wandering magic energy in the plane. This was the main reason why Grim's reserves of fire energy were rapidly declining. Where did the energy come from? Of course it came from the high-calorie food. Therefore, after waking up, Grim decided to gorge himself on food just like Katie did to replenish the energy in his body. However, Katie had only been chewing on a bunch of violent earth bears that were only Tier 1. Grim, on the other hand, had taken out Tier 3 fire dragon meat from his pouch and roasted it. The difference in energy between the two was like night and day. After 5 kilograms of fire dragon meat entered his stomach, Grim felt the warm energy slowly spreading in his stomach. He let out a satisfied burp, his mind returning to its usual sharpness. After sleeping and eating his fill, it was time to check on his gains in Hawkins City. The Grade 4 Sodden Divine Ring was undoubtedly a high-grade magic item that far surpassed Grim's strength. With it, Grim would be able to suppress normal Grade 3 magi even though he was only a Grade 3 magus. In order to avoid exposing its strength, Grim had to cast a disguise spell on it to make it less conspicuous. After fiddling with Sodden's divine ring for a long time, Grim put it back on his right pinky finger and turned to inspect the other items. In the next second, the plague-poisoned spirit that had fused with his soul crawled out of thin air and ran around in front of him like a delicate doll. Grade 3. After the battle in Hawkins City, not only did Grim gain a lot, but the plague-poisoned spirit had also successfully advanced to Grade 3. Moreover, this increase in grade had caused its existence to undergo some strange changes. At Grade 1, this soul equipment was in the form of a spell book. At Grade 2, it had turned into a wooden doll with strange runes drawn all over its body. Now that it had reached Grade 3, it was closer to a real life form. At least, from the outside, it looked like a strange little boy that was only 1 meter tall, with dark green skin and green eyes. Its body was naked, and there were no genitals between its legs. Although its movements were still a little stiff and sluggish, it was still not as agile as a real life form. But when he ran around Grim happily, Grim suddenly had the illusion that he had a son. "Master, I also want a name." Just as Grim was muttering to himself and smiling, a timid child's voice entered his ears. The other party's request made Grim's heart skip a beat. "A name? Why do you want a name?" Grim asked with a smile. "Because Master has a name, Alice has a name, and Mary has a name, so I want a name too." This was obviously the first time the plague-poisoned spirit had taken the initiative to communicate with someone. Although it stuttered at the start, once it started speaking, its words became more fluent and natural. Grim noticed that the plague-poisoned spirit had a spiritual connection with him. If they wanted to communicate, they could instantly understand each other's thoughts through a spiritual channel. There was no need for them to use the clumsy and ancient method of communication. However, it had chosen to use such a method. Moreover, it used the common language of the Zenbai's empire in Invix Plane. This meant that the plague-poisoned spirit could rely on its special ability to fuse with Grim's vast knowledge. Although it was limited by its innate talent and could not cast fire spells, it could still share most of the knowledge that had been sorted out by the AI chip. Grimm let out a long sigh. After spending so much effort and resources, he had finally upgraded this strange item that was bound to his soul to grade 3. From now on, it was no longer of little value. Instead, it was a powerful assistant that could truly help him. However, wasn't this 1-meter body a little too small? What abilities did it have? As if sensing Grimm's doubts, the plague-poisoned spirit opened up its soul and revealed its true self to Grimm. Target creature: plague-poisoned spirit. Temporary name: target race. Magic contract spirit. Target rank: grade 3. Target basic attributes: strength 3, vitality 8, agility 5, spirit 31. Target magical property: poison attribute. Target innate abilities: poison halo, plague spores, soul poison, plague transformation. The list of skills projected by the AI chip was densely packed with battle skills with strange names and strange abilities. These were the basic abilities that the plague poison spirit had grasped. As it progressed, these abilities would continue to strengthen. Grimm scanned through the plague poison spirit's data and could not help but mutter to himself. He could tell that the plague poison spirit was a special contracted creature that needed protection in order to display its strength. Its strength, vitality, and agility were obviously on the lower end, only on par with those who had just advanced to become official magi. All of its strength was concentrated in its spiritual force. The only thing he did not know was how it fought. This was something that he would have to slowly figure out and correct in his long life of battle. From today onwards, your name shall be Remy. Hearing Grimm's words, the dark green little boy cheered happily and skipped off to play with the big guy, an elemental weapon. Grimm hesitated for a moment, then took out the strange spirit-gathering crystal from his waist and held it in front of his eyes. AI chip: scan and examine the spirit-gathering crystal. Beep. Scanning has begun. As his spiritual force slowly flowed, a dazzling blue ray shot out from Grimm's black eyes and struck the spirit-gathering crystal. Indistinctly, thousands of mournful and shrill cries of souls rang out from within the soul-gathering crystal, making Grimm dizzy. After a quarter of an hour, the AI chip's scan finally came to an end, and a new report was presented to Grimm. Target scanned: spirit-gathering crystal species. High-grade energy aggregation number of targets. After scanning, a total of 175 high-grade energy individuals have been discovered, with a total energy of 7,963 pathos. There is one rank 3 individual with an energy of 4,214 pathos, accounting for 51/92% of the total energy. There are 18 rank 2 individuals with an energy of 2,946 pathos, accounting for 36% of the total energy. There are 156 rank 1 individuals with an energy of 803 pathos, accounting for 12% of the total energy. There are also 156 rank 1 individuals with an energy of 803 pathos, accounting for 12% of the total energy. After absorbing the energy of faith, the host will need to purify the energy at regular intervals, or else there will be unpredictable changes to the host's spiritual force. The host will need to purify the spiritual force at regular intervals after absorbing the energy of faith, or else there will be unpredictable changes to the spiritual force. Chapter 962. Ever since he had stepped onto the path of a magus, Grimm had been tormented by the difficulty of advancing. Before becoming a magus, he lacked the necessary means to obtain resources. All acolytes could only rely on the resources that fell through the cracks of official magi to strengthen themselves. After becoming a magus, the effects of meditation techniques on magi were no longer as significant as before. Most of the time, magi had no choice but to leave their laboratories in order to improve themselves faster and better. They had to travel to various ancient wastelands, ancient ruins, or even some strange and dangerous places, risking their lives in order to obtain some necessary resources. For them, staying in the safety of a magus tower might be able to last until the end of their lifespan. However, the slow increase in the main attributes of their profession was like a noose around their necks, tightening day after day, year after year. If they were unable to advance to the next rank before their lifespan ended, what awaited them was a withered body, a weakening of their spiritual force, and the decay of their soul. Compared to a regular person, this process could take up to 10 years, until their soul undulations completely dissipated. This process of waiting for death was so long and terrifying that most magi who entered the stage of life exhaustion would become even more demonic, crazy, and unimaginable. Although time seemed to be plentiful for wizards, it was still like a terrible god of death that would visit you on time, using the world's dullest and slowest knife to cut off your connection with the world bit by bit until you fell into eternal darkness. Hence, using all sorts of methods to accumulate resources and think of ways to increase one's profession's attributes had become a never-ending theme in the life of a magus. The path that Grimm had chosen as an elemental magus was a difficult and dangerous path, where spiritual force was the main attribute of his profession. Every point of increase in his basic spiritual force was very meaningful to him. This was because if any point of basic spiritual force was matched with suitable spells and powerful magic equipment, the resulting increase in battle strength would be 10 times, or even 100 times greater. Hence, the importance of basic spiritual force to Grimm was obvious. Now, the AI chip's scan told him that there was a method that did not require years of meditation to quickly increase his spiritual force. How great of an impact would this have on Grimm be? Grimm asked the AI chip to scan the soul congregation crystal at least 3 times, and every time it came to the same conclusion. Only then did he completely believe the AI chip's report. As for the side effects mentioned at the end of the AI chip's report, Grimm did not take them seriously. This was not because Grimm was careless or reckless, but because he knew how difficult it was to increase his mental strength. He meditated year after year, but his spiritual power data did not change at all. He broke into some extremely dangerous ruins to search for resources that suited him. He served a large family or a large organization for decades just to obtain some resources that they monopolized. Compared to these difficulties, a little bit of mental backlash or side effects was simply too easy. Any wizard in Grimm's position would choose to strengthen their spirit without hesitation. As for the side effects, it was better to wait until his strength increased before thinking of a way to resolve it bit by bit. After all, greater strength also meant greater authority and more resources. Would there be no need to worry about not having a way to deal with some minor sequelae? Of course, the pure holy light in the soul congregation crystal had to wash away the remnant soul fragments of the paladins. These things were like impurities in the light of faith. If they were not removed in advance, once Grimm absorbed them into his sea of consciousness, the consequences would be dire. In the magus world, there were many magi who researched evil spells that absorbed other people's spiritual force for their own use. However, all of these spells had to face a terrifying disaster, and that was the backlash of the spiritual force. It was like clothes of different colors and materials stitched together. On the surface, it looked as good as new, but once it was subjected to a huge pressure, it could fall apart in an instant. Hence, these magi invented some special spells or special magic tools to suppress the backlash in the depths of their souls. However, the consequence of this was that they had to carefully control their own mental state. Once their mind was damaged, it was possible for their hidden personality to take over the control of their body, causing them to lose control of their body. However, the AI chip's method of absorption was obviously different, and even a little unimaginable. According to the AI chip's scan and analysis, the pure holy light that Grimm encountered was completely different from the souls of the dead collected by other magi. It was more like a type of ownerless free power of faith, and it had the strange ability to dissolve all external energy and consciousness. By storing them, the remnant souls of the paladins within the holy light would be able to be sustained for a long time. This was obviously not beneficial to Grimm's absorption. Hence, the AI chip suggested that Grimm separate a portion of his consciousness into the soul congregation crystal to fight for the control of the holy light. If the holy light in the soul congregation crystal was fused into one, Grimm would undoubtedly be courting death. However, it was like a plate of loose sand. All the souls of the paladins had become incomplete, and they only knew to instinctively cling onto the holy light, wailing day and night for their pitiful fate. This situation was obviously suitable for Grimm to defeat them one by one. Grimm's split soul only needed to defeat them one by one and snatch the holy light they possessed, and it would gradually grow stronger day by day. Once the split soul had completely devoured all the souls and gathered their holy light together, it would then choose to self-destruct, allowing the strengthened split soul to become nourishment for the holy light. This way, there would not be any side effects when Grimm chose to fuse with the holy light to strengthen his spiritual force. As for the problem of purification after Grimm absorbed large amounts of external spiritual force, that was another problem. After all, with his authority and wealth, a regular spiritual purification ceremony would not cause his family's finances to collapse. However, it was difficult to split a portion of a soul in such a crude and desolate place. He would have to wait until he returned to the Magus world and use the alchemy laboratory in the Magus Tower to carry it out. Just as Grimm was pondering over the following questions with the soul-gathering crystal in his hand, deep in his soul, he was attracted by a strange scene from afar. This was a small path in the forest about 30 miles east of Grimm's cave. An apprentice-level wind spirit that was completely transparent was floating above the forest. It was slowly patrolling along a unique trajectory. And at this moment, 3 figures of different heights suddenly approached from afar on the forest path. They were all wrapped in thick black travelers' cloaks, and even their faces were covered by their hoods. It was impossible to see their occupation and identity. However, one could only tell from their vague figures that they were a man and 2 women. Their movements were strange. Wind Spirit, who was left here by Grimm to act as his eyes and ears, immediately lowered his altitude and stuck close to the dense canopy of the trees. He quietly gathered a faint breeze and blew it towards the 3 of them. However, just as the breeze was about to reach the 3, the smallest of the 3 suddenly raised its head, and a pair of eyes that were as bright as the morning stars coldly stared at the Wind Spirit. In the next second, Wind Spirit's soul connection with Grimm was cut off. Originally, the Wind Spirit spies were all controlled by the AI chip. Their daily patrol routes, investigations, and scanning were all passed to the AI chip for it to control. If there were no police reports, the AI chip would be in charge of handling all the miscellaneous daily information. But now, the AI chip projected the scene of the spies in the distance into Grimm's mind. This meant that the situation he was facing had exceeded the scope of a normal police report, and he had to handle it personally. AI chip, can you confirm their identities? Are they paladins or magi? Grimm asked in a low voice. In truth, Grimm would rather fight 2 Grade 3 natives than a single Grade 3 magus. After all, the sorcery that sorcerers mastered was too complicated and too strange. Many times, even if a magus was stronger than another magus, he could still lose his life because of some of the more sinister spells. The AI chip quickly projected the last scene of the Wind Spirit's death in front of Grimm's eyes, and gradually enlarged it. The originally dim shadow of the hood gradually became clearer as the projection zoomed in. This was the face of a charming woman. Her face was delicate and beautiful, and her face was delicate and white. Her rosy skin was full of vitality, and even the fine hairs on her skin were smooth and smooth, without the slightest blemish. However, what attracted Grimm's attention was not her beauty, but her strange eyes that suddenly lit up, as well as the strange crystal embedded in her forehead. Grimm repeatedly admired such a beautiful face, but his heart was strangely heavy and depressed. Magi. Without a doubt, they were definitely magi from the Magus world. This also meant that there were a few more enemies who had barged into Invic's plane to kill him. As for the mastermind behind the scenes, it was possible that he was sending more hunters to this place. The female magus who had revealed her traces was definitely a grade 3 magus. From her appearance and the way she used her abilities, she seemed to be a spirit warlock, a special profession that could use mental spells. But were the other two at grade 3 or grade 4? If they were all grade 3, what would their individual abilities be? After inspecting his gains, Grim, who had been a little complacent, was immediately disturbed by the sudden appearance of these enemies. The enemies had already started to kill the spies he had set up outside, and from the direction they had come from, it seemed that they had come from Hawkins City. This meant that there was definitely a terrifying person among them who was adept at tracking. It seemed that he would have to fight them if necessary. Chapter 963. They were still on the deserted path in the forest. The strong light in Benigia's purple eyes began to dissipate, and an invisible mind wave radiated from her in all directions. "What's wrong? Did you find something?" Natagu, the giant snake wizard, stopped and asked in a low voice. Benigia's mental strength was the strongest in the team, so she was the team's vanguard and guide. They were able to track them all the way from Hawkins City to here because of Benigia's strange mind-sensing ability. "I just killed a wind elemental creature. It doesn't look like it's wild. It's likely to be a spy the target placed in the periphery." Her spirit ripples were still silently scanning the surroundings for any signs of activity. On the entire path, be it birds or squirrels hiding under thick ancient trees, or snakes or rats or ants hiding a few meters below the ground, nothing could escape Benigia's mind waves. Wherever she passed, as long as any living creature had signs of life, they would be fed back to her mind in the form of special light spots. Benigia chose to ignore the extremely small light spot. But when it came to the medium and large creatures, Benigia's mind waves would cause them to ignore this strange team, whether intentionally or unintentionally. In Benigia's purple eyes, there was a colorful, illusory, and magnificent world in front of her. Apart from being able to see the physical scene in front of her, she could also use her elemental vision to check the distribution and flow of magical elements within her line of sight. The fire wizard had passed by here 2 days ago, which could be determined from the concentration of light red fire elemental particles left in the forest. Elemental wizards were, after all, large elemental reactors. Even if they tried their best to restrain their energy radiation, it would still change the concentration of elemental particles in the area they passed by to varying degrees. Therefore, in Benigia's eyes, there was an erratic red band of light in front of her, extending from Hawkins City into the distance. The area that the fire wizard had passed by was as eye-catching as a bonfire in the dark. She couldn't ignore it even if she wanted to. By relying on the remaining fire elemental particles in the air, Benigia could vaguely sense the fire wizard's basic strength, physical condition, and crude emotional reactions. It seemed that the fire wizard had a bountiful harvest in the native city. Even his remaining fire elemental particles were faintly filled with joy and agitation. She could sense that this was a young magus with outstanding talent, and his body was filled with a fiery and berserk energy. He was very, very young, so young that it was beyond Benigia's expectations, but the elemental aura he left behind carried a strong and enviable aura of youth, just like the clean, fragrant, and sweet smell of a newborn baby. "So you mean, the enemy has already discovered us?" Natagu's green snake eyes coldly stared at Benigia, making her feel as if her body was being entangled by a sticky and cold snake's tongue. It was a terrible feeling. Yes, when I extinguished the wind elemental, I vaguely sensed a strange spiritual energy watching us. However, this spiritual energy doesn't seem to be a living thing, so I can't quite grasp it. Benia bit her lower lip as she replied in distress. It could be some kind of witchcraft of the fire wizard. Nataga said coldly, "Didn't the Lord say that he is very good at making puppets?" He always has powerful elemental puppets of the same rank by his side? It seems that we are very close to his hiding place. Let's go, hurry up, don't let him escape again. The hunchbacked old witch, Gweneville, raised her head and sniffed the air a few times, then shook her head in disappointment. It seemed that the fire wizard did not release the poison spirit, or she would have been able to smell the unique elemental aura of the poison spirit. The three of them discussed for a while, then stopped talking and continued on their way. In a vast and boundless forest, Grim stood on a cliff that protruded from the sea of trees, silently looking into the distance. There, a huge flaming mushroom cloud was slowly rising, accompanied by a majestic ring of dust around it. "How is it, Chip? What did you find?" Grim asked in his mind. "Beat. The area of the trap is enveloped by a strange energy. I am unable to find their stats." The Chip's feedback left Grim very disappointed. He could not help but ask, if there are no stats, what about the vague energy levels? Are they at rank 3 or 4? There should be some sort of outline, right? Rank 3. According to the strength of the energy feedback in the area of the trap, no rank 4 energy has been detected. The 3 targets have been judged to be rank 3. Accuracy, 76%, needs further data to be corrected. I've finally heard some good news. Grim licked his lips and narrowed his eyes. As long as there are no rank 4 creatures, I'm not afraid no matter how many rank 3 creatures there are. At most, we can play hide and seek here. I don't believe that they would dare to fight to the death with the rank 4 natives at their doorstep. With that, Grim's body was engulfed in flames, and with a flame leap, he appeared in the sky hundreds of meters away. The flames around him condensed into a pair of flaming wings on his back, carrying his body through the air at a rapid speed. Before he had even flown a few hundred meters, Flame Leap cooled down once more, and Grim's flaming body flickered once more. Relying on the alternating use of Flame Leap and Flaming Wings, Grim rushed towards the southwest of the Zambi's empire at his fastest speed. Moreover, his actions with such great fanfare had also completely exposed him in front of everyone. The citizens of this ancient country were fortunate enough to experience the terror of a powerful magus from another world. Zambi's empire, northwest region. The sky seemed to be ablaze, and the roiling clouds of fire dyed the sky a bright red. The rumbling sounds of rolling flames could also be heard from the battle. Grim flashed once every 5 seconds as he flew at an altitude of several hundred meters. The scarlet firefly's flaming wings dragged out an unending trail of flames behind him. Every time he used Flame Leap, he would leave behind a ring of flames that would slowly spread out. In order to travel as fast as possible, Grim no longer cared if his actions would disturb the natives below him. He desperately squeezed out the Balrog's heart in his chest, causing it to pulse and roar madly, sending waves of extremely pure flame energy to every part of his body. The flame energy surging in his body had a temperature of 3,000 to 4,000 degrees, and the energy level was terrifying. Even so, the Balrog's heart's output at full power was unable to support Grim's violent actions. Thus, after traversing a distance of more than 700 kilometers, Grim found a large lake and dove into it. Lake Cascara. This was the largest area in the central part of the Zambi's empire, with the clearest water and the most abundant fish. The abundant Bane River and the meandering Fenris River that flowed through half the empire intersected here, forming a vast swamp that spanned hundreds of kilometers. As this place was located within the empire, it had not been baptized by the flames of war for hundreds of years. Even the invasion of the witches in the southern part of the empire did not spread the flames of war to this place. One lived off the mountains and one lived off the sea. Most of the people living here were fishermen. They usually left early and returned late. Although it was a little tiring, it was still much more leisurely and comfortable than the people at the border who were caught in the flames of war and dispute. Even though this place was not as prosperous and lively as a big city, it had its own unique peace and tranquility. However, on this day, a large cloud of fire suddenly ignited at the end of the horizon, followed by a series of loud roars. Immediately after that, a huge flaming meteor streaked across the sky, falling straight down from the vault of heaven. With a loud boom, it rushed into the deepest part of Lake Cascara. The terrifying flame shock wave collided with the towering water column, instantly causing a small half of the lake to boil and boil. In the steaming lake water, countless half-cooked silver barracudas floated on the surface of the lake, while the strange meteor had already sunk to the bottom of the lake. Countless people who made a living in Lake Cascara had witnessed this terrifying scene, but with their primitive and simple minds, how could they understand the terrible content hidden behind the scene in front of them? Half an hour later, in a place with lush water plants, Grim walked out of the lake step by step, his body steaming with heat waves. Before he even took 2 steps on the shore, his wizard robe had been roasted dry by the fire elements. Grim turned his head to look at the path he came from, a trace of a mischievous smile appearing on his young and handsome face. He did not know what the 3 hunters would do if he left so wildly and arrogantly. Would they learn from him and chase after him, or would they continue to chase him on the ground with pale faces? No matter which one it was probably not a choice they would be willing to make. After running so far in one go, even with Grim's strength, he could not help but feel a little weak. He quickly gathered the overflowing flame energy, dressed himself up as an ordinary traveler, and turned to the east of Lake Cascara. Chapter 964. Zora City. This was a medium-sized city with a population of 50,000. It mainly traded the fish from Lake Cascara and transported them to other parts of the Zambeze Empire through the convenient waterways. Therefore, when Grim arrived at the trade route leading to Zola City, he found that almost all the people coming and going here were loaded wagons full of fish. In order to better conceal himself, Grim used witchcraft to alter his appearance. The eye-catching wizard robes and equipment were now hidden. He was now wearing a simple set of leather armor and trousers, a 2-handed sword on his back, and a gray traveler's cloak. He looked like an adventurer who was on the move. His appearance had also changed slightly. The eye-catching dark red hair and black pupils had disappeared. He looked no different from the citizens of the Empire. Grim stopped a caravan on the road and paid 2 imperial silver coins to become a member of the caravan. He and the coachman, Old Tom, squeezed into a carriage full of fresh fish and slowly headed for Zora City in the distance. The closer they got to Zora City, the more caravans and pedestrians there were on the trade route. Amidst the heavy traffic, the merchants and coachmen who passed by each other kept shouting and greeting each other, looking very friendly. However, when they were less than 10 miles away from Zora City, the thunderous sound of horse hooves came from the front. The carriages and pedestrians on the trade route all moved to the side of the road, allowing a group of knights in silver armor to charge past them on their tall horses, kicking up a cloud of dust behind them. Although the caravan was a little panicked because of the knights in silver armor, no one complained when they saw the knights passing by. Instead, when the knights disappeared, the caravan returned to the trade route. The merchants and coachmen began to discuss the reason why the knights were in such a hurry. It must be because of the strange things that happened at Lake Cascara. Old Tom muttered as he waved his whip, "Something terrible must have happened there. The paladins will definitely investigate it." "The strange things at Lake Cascara?" Grim asked doubtfully. "You don't know? Look at you. Didn't you just come back from Lake Cascara? Did you not see the terrifying flint that fell from the sky yesterday?" Old Tom looked incredulous. "Oh, you're talking about that flint. It's not that strange, so there's no need to make a fuss," Grim replied with a relaxed expression. "You're an adventurer, so you've seen a lot of things. But this is the first time I've seen such a terrifying scene in Zora City in 30 years. You may not have seen it with your own eyes, but after the flint fell, half of the lake boiled. The dead fish and shrimps that floated on the surface of the water were so dense that it looked terrifying." Old Tom was obviously a rather talkative person. Once he started talking about yesterday's strange event, he would not stop talking. It was as if he was going to spill everything he knew. While Grim was chatting with Old Tom, his thoughts drifted to the group of holy knights that had just galloped past. There were 6 Grade 1 Black Iron Knights, but not even a Grade 2 Silver Knight. This made Grim lower his expectation about the Holy Light Chapel in Zora City. If the Holy Light Chapel in Zola City was big enough, Grim wouldn't mind doing a big job here. However, if the Holy Light Chapel was too small, it would not be worth exposing his identity and whereabouts. Nataga was in a terrible mood at this moment. Although he had been warned many times by the Lord that this young fire wizard was very hard to deal with, he was still very confident about this trip. Although it was 3 against 1, Natagu was still very confident about this trip. However, his idea of hunting happily didn't last for more than half a day before the cruel reality in front of him crushed him. That bastard escaped in such an ostentatious and arrogant way. Obviously, he was challenging Natagu's patience. However, just when he was about to chase after the young fire wizard without caring about anything else, a short SOS message came through the air and made Nataga calm down. The message was sent by the mechanical witch, Katie, who had left alone. The message was short and only contained 2 words: "Save me." After the message was sent, when Natagu and the other 2 tried to contact her again, they could not get any response. What happened to Katie? The 3 magi who had just landed couldn't help but feel suspicious. Logically speaking, in a low-level plane like in Vic Plane, a Grade 3 wizard could almost do whatever he wanted here. As long as they did not encounter those terrifying Grade 4 wizards, the rest of the Grade 3 Holy Knights were just a bunch of fake charlatans without the protection of the gods. The so-called Holy Knights seemed to have the combat skills of a high-grade knight and the holy light theurgy that was similar to spellcasters. They could use both long-range and short-range spells, and they cultivated both magic and physical skills. However, in the eyes of the wizards, they were a typical trash profession that was neither good at literature nor martial arts. The wizards who came this time were all combat wizards, and each of them had the identity of a hunter. With such strength, how could they be in danger in this low-level plane? Even if Katie were to be surrounded by multiple Grade 3 paladins, she would still be able to easily break out of the encirclement and escape. However, the opponent was able to beat her to the point that she cried for help and was quickly defeated. The 3 wizards could not help but think of the 2 famous Grade 4 Holy Knights in this plane. Right, there were 2 Grade 4 Holy Knights in this plane. One was in the south, leading people to besiege the Witch Tower, and the other was seriously injured and recuperating in the Empire. Could it be that this Holy Knight, who was recuperating from his injuries, wanted to move again? Little did they know that in a forest 120 miles north of them, a fierce battle had just ended. More than half of the team of Holy Knights that rushed over from the imperial capital had been injured, and the forest they were in was a mess. Broken ancient trees could be seen everywhere, and the strength chi that cut through the soil could be seen everywhere. Katie, the terrifying Katie, had both her arms and legs chopped off, and was nailed to the cliff by a huge sword. Even though the situation was dire, the ferocious Katie still fired terrifying energy beams from her crimson mechanical eyes, shredding the ancient trees and shrubs around her into pieces, creating a scene of desolation and devastation. The Tier 4 Holy Knight had a simple and unadorned face and a determined expression. His short, white hair stood on end, giving him the appearance of an enraged lion. Seeing that the wicked witch was still so ferocious even after her arms and legs were severed, the Grade 4 Holy Knight dashed towards Katie like an arrow and extended his right hand. Unafraid of Katie's terrifying crimson energy beam, he poked and bent 2 of his fingers and dug out the 2 strange half-machine eyeballs. Ah! Katie opened her mouth and let out a shrill scream. 5 or 6 cracks appeared on her back, and a few metal tentacles reached out, ready to attack the Holy Paladin. Humph! You don't know what's good for you. The Holy Knight snorted coldly. He reached out with his right hand and grabbed the metal tentacles with lightning speed. With a sudden burst of strength, Katy raised her neck and let out a shrill scream. The metal tentacles that were connected to her spine were severed at the roots, and several large bloody holes appeared on her back. Purplish-black blood mixed with a fishy smell flowed out from the holes, and the surrounding Holy Knights were forced to take a few steps back. However, even after suffering such a terrible injury, Katy still twisted her body, intending to retaliate. The Holy Knight finally lost his patience. He reached out and quickly struck a few joints on Katy's body. Neck, shoulder, sternum, lumbar, tail. The series of attacks immediately dislocated or ruptured the metal joints in Katy's body. Katy's control over the mechanical parts and flesh was instantly paralyzed. Katy's body finally went limp, no longer able to resist. After subduing the ferocious mechanical witch, the Holy Knight looked around the battlefield. He saw the forest that had been destroyed, and then looked at the Holy Knights lying on the ground. His heart was filled with shock and anger. What shocked him was the savagery and brutality of these foreign invaders. He was furious at their indifferent attitude towards the creatures of the Envic Plain. This Tier 4 Divine Knight, Ader? Carly was finally thoroughly enraged. All the wizards should die. They couldn't be allowed to continue existing in the Envic Plain. His raging emotions had triggered Adler? The injuries on Carly's body caused him to be unable to help but cough violently, and in one breath, he spat out a large pool of black blood. Amidst the black blood, he could vaguely see some organ fragments and flesh fibers. This clearly showed that the serious injuries he had suffered in the Witch Tower had not only not stabilized, but even showed signs of worsening. In order to reduce the casualties of the ordinary Holy Knights besieging the Witch Tower, Ader? Carly had once relied on his powerful strength to forcibly break into the Witch Tower and destroy the interplane long-distance teleportation formation there. Under the joint attack of the witches in the tower, his body had suffered a near-fatal blow. If the holy light in his body was not the best at healing and dissolving foreign energy, perhaps Ader? Carly would not have been able to escape the tower alive. Although he had escaped alive, the terrible injuries on his body deeply tormented him. Out of desperation, Ader? Carly could only leave the battlefield and return to the imperial capital to recuperate. He used the holy space in the Cathedral of Holy Light to heal his injuries. Unfortunately, just as his injuries were getting better, the almighty Holy Light transmitted the strongest warning to his ears. According to the Holy Light, there would be new enemies invading the northern part of the Empire. Their arrival would also cause a terrible calamity for the Holy Knights. It was because of this terrible foreboding that Carly forced himself to lead a group of Holy Knights to the northern part of the Empire through the night. In order to save time, they even crossed the Avlee Mountains, Starfall Canyon, and the Wild Forest. It was unknown whether it was the correct guidance of the Holy Light or the bad luck of the enemies, but when their team crossed the Hammer Mountain, they actually encountered this lone witch from another world. Chapter 965. After paying the entrance fee, Grimm easily snuck into Zora City. After spending half a day walking around the city, Grimm was immediately disappointed. There was indeed a Holy Light Chapel in the city, but it was much smaller than the one in Hawkins City. Grimm only sensed a Grade 2 energy aura inside, and the rest were all Grade 1 or insignificant characters. Grimm hesitated for a long time and finally gave up on the idea of encircling this Holy Light Chapel. Instead, he went to a tavern on the eastern side of the city. Wine and Roses. This was the name of the tavern. It sounded elegant, but when Grimm pushed open the two old and dirty doors and stepped inside, he was immediately assaulted by the pungent and cheap fragrance of cosmetics, the stench of dead sweat, and the unique fragrance of oatmeal wine. Grimm frowned. The sky was not completely dark yet, but the tavern was already overcrowded. Grimm was still dressed as a mercenary swordsman. His 2-meter height made him look strong and mighty. Standing in front of the dimly lit tavern entrance, he seemed to have an intimidating aura without being angry. A few strong men who had their arms around each other's shoulders and were about to leave bumped into him. Their eyes, which were so drunk that they could barely open their eyes, met the 2 cold gazes from the tall black shadow. They immediately shuddered and sobered up half of their drunkenness. These strong men were members of the Willy Brotherhood in the lower city of Zola City. They were usually fierce and domineering, and they were famous thugs in the area. However, for some reason, when they saw this tall figure that they could not even see clearly, their hearts began to beat crazily. In the end, they obediently retreated to the side and gave way to the counter. Wherever Grimm passed, whether it was the drunkards, the gorgeously dressed maids with plates in their hands, or the men in black who were hiding in the shadows, all of them changed their expressions and hurriedly hid to the side. Many of the men who claimed to be brave only realized their cowardice after they instinctively dodged. However, when they were enraged and wanted to make trouble for him with the help of their drunkenness, the moment their gazes landed on the tall and majestic back, the restlessness that they felt just now vanished in an instant. The tavern owner, who looked like a wine barrel, wiped the sweat off his face with the greasy towel in his hand and forced a smile on his plump face. Sir, what do you want?" Judging from Grimm's attire, he looked like a wandering mercenary in dire straits. But when you really stood in front of him and looked him in the eyes, an indescribable spiritual pressure would press down on you, almost suffocating you. The difference in their levels of life was too great. Even though Grimm had tried his best to restrain his overflowing energy and spiritual pressure, these ordinary people still could not remain calm in front of him. "I need some information." Grimm had no intention of hiding his intentions. As he spoke, he threw out a small pouch. The pouch landed on the dark counter, and the crisp sound of gold coins colliding could be heard. The tavern owner's face instantly became excited and enthusiastic. He used his plump right hand to swipe the counter with extreme agility that did not match his fat body, and the heavy pouch disappeared in an instant. His movements were so fast that Grimm began to wonder if he had a special profession like godly thief. The fat on the tavern owner's face jumped, and he immediately put on a flattering smile. "Sir, do you see that skinny man in the corner over there? His name is Locke, the intelligence leader of Zola City. You can ask him if you have any questions. Let me tell you a secret, he's a high-ranking member of the Dagger Society." Listening to the tavern owner's introduction, Grimm slightly tilted his head and saw the so-called Locke in the dark corner. He was a skinny man dressed in black. His face was ordinary, and there was nothing special about him. Only a pair of rolling eyes showed that he was smart and cunning. As soon as Grimm entered the tavern, the guy called Locke noticed him. He whispered to his companions while peeking at Grimm from the corner of his eyes. When Grimm directed his gaze over, Locke's face twitched involuntarily. Before Locke could think of a way to sneak out, Grimm's tall body was already standing in front of the wooden table. The huge shadow he cast caused the faces of the people at the table to change dramatically, and sweat appeared on their foreheads. "Are you Locke? I need to buy some information from you." Grimm went straight to the point. Hearing that he was looking for Locke, the other people who were dressed like Locke immediately left the table, leaving the hidden space for the two of them. "So you're here to buy information. That's good, that's good." Locke finally relaxed, and a flattering smile appeared on his skinny face. "May I know how to address you, sir? What kind of information do you want to buy?" "I want to know what happened in Hawkins City." Hearing Grimm's question, the smile on Locke's face instantly disappeared, and it was replaced by an unconcealable shock and horror. Soon after, he looked at Grimm with a bewildered gaze and said in a low voice, "Sir, the information you want to know is top secret. The officials of the Imperial Intelligence Department have already warned us not to pry." "You mean, you don't know anything?" Grimm's tone turned cold. "Sir, don't look down on the Dagger Society. We have the information you want, but we can't sell it outside due to the restrictions of the Empire." Before he finished speaking, a white crystal the size of a fist rolled in front of him. Even though they were in the darkest corner of the tavern, and most of the light from the kerosene lamps hanging on the wall was blocked by the pillars, it still could not hide the unique magical luster of the white crystal. When the dim light shone on the crystal, it instantly resonated with the magic power, making it dazzling and brightening up half of the tavern as if it was daytime. White crystals were magical gems that could absorb, condense, and magnify light. They were also the best treasures for paladins to forge high-grade sacred weapons, so they were definitely worth a lot in Invic Plain. Locke, who had been pretending to be calm, hurriedly kept the white crystal in his arms. Only after it was out of the light did the blinding white light slowly dissipate, returning the place to darkness. The tavern fell silent in an instant. Everyone who was blinded by the white light rubbed their eyes as they peeked at the corner. "That's enough. Sir, that's definitely worth enough. But," Locke gritted his teeth and explained, "the Empire has also told us to pay attention to what kind of people would pay attention to this information. So, if I didn't know your identity, Locke's words came to an abrupt halt. With his back facing the people in the tavern, the tall figure raised his right hand in front of his chest, and a small milky white halo slowly appeared. The white light was so pure and holy that Locke could not help but pray to the holy light, repenting for the sins he had committed. "So you really are a sir. That makes things easier. Whatever you want to know, I won't hide it." In Invic Plain, paladins had a huge influence that transcended all worldly powers. There were many noble and virtuous paladins who were willing to travel the world to eradicate ferocious beasts, punish evildoers, and heal the wounded. This made this group of paladins the most accepted sacred profession in society. Even a gray figure like Locke, who walked in the shadows and darkness, would admire and respect a paladin. "Sir, I can't accept your things. How about this, you can ask whatever you want to know. I will do my best to help you." Grim shook his head, but did not take back the white crystal that was covered by the black cloth. Instead, he quickly answered in a low voice. A few minutes later, Grim nodded in satisfaction. He bowed slightly to Locke and turned to leave the tavern. Grim had gotten the answer he wanted from Locke, so he did not stay in Zora City. He bought 2 tall and strong horses, some food and water, and left the southern gate, blending into the crowd and heading south. The Dagger Society was indeed a famous intelligence organization in the Zambeze Empire. Although they did not know everything that had happened in Harkenth City, they had a rough understanding of it. Zora City, where Locke was from, was nearly 800 kilometers away from Harkenth City. Only 4 days had passed since the battle in Harkenth City, yet they were able to gather so much information. For an underground organization that roamed in the dark, this was commendable. Therefore, Grim used this method to verify the credibility of Locke's information. What he really wanted to know was not Harkenth City, but the whereabouts of the other 2 deception witches. They had entered Invic Plain together 2 months ago, but due to unexpected factors, they had to split up. From Locke, Grim found out that there seemed to be some trouble in the west of the Empire a month ago. Someone reported that they had found traces of witches. The Chapel of Light had also sent out a large number of paladins to join in the encirclement. They seemed to have trapped the witches in a place called the Dark Forest. Chapter 966. The Dark Forest. Compared to the Sorcerer World, the Zambeze Empire's exploitation of resources was still in a primitive state. As a result, most of the inner regions of the plain were undeveloped primeval forests or uncivilized regions. Places where humans could move about were surrounded by many dangerous creatures. The Dark Forest at the western border of the Empire was one such region. There were many primeval creatures and terrifying magical beasts within the Dark Forest. They gathered there and multiplied, forming a unique and exclusive foreign world. This was a harsh problem that most plain worlds had to face. survival of the fittest, the natural selection. Powerful magical beasts, with their powerful physiques and ferocious fighting styles, became the rulers of most regions. They fought for themselves, either in families, tribes, or alone. They occupied the regions with the richest minerals and plants on the continent. Compared to them, intelligent races like humans had no competitive edge. At the beginning of their existence, human beings did not have strong bodies, natural magic talent, and sharp teeth and claws. Therefore, they could only hug each other for warmth and struggle to survive in the gaps between the many savage ancient beasts and ferocious monsters. If it weren't for humanity's outstanding ability to learn and create, allowing them to learn some powerful and strange abilities from the magical creatures as their teachers and pass them down and strengthen them, it would have been almost impossible for humans to become the ruler of the plane. The first batch of sorcerers in the sorcerer world were ancient humans who imitated the natural magic patterns on powerful magical beasts and obtained some strange abilities. After tens of thousands of years of continuous accumulation and improvement, an effective sorcerer cultivation system was formed. It was precisely by relying on the sorcerers that the humans of the sorcerer world finally defeated all kinds of powerful magical beasts and became the largest race there. However, as the sorcerer community grew stronger day by day, they gradually grew into a new race that was completely different from ordinary humans. The development of planes was almost the same. The Envic plane was on the same path of development as the sorcerer's world, but the power system it evolved into was similar to the worship of the holy light, which was similar to the belief of the gods. Most of the humans in Envic worshipped the holy light, thus pushing a natural phenomenon that had no life and consciousness onto the altar. Faith was also a form of power. It was precisely because of the continuous faith of millions of Envic citizens that the holy light became a powerful and unparalleled power. At the very least, in the Envic dimension, this power had already been embedded in the dimension law, becoming an important pillar that supported the development and growth of the dimension's consciousness. With the blessing of the plane's consciousness, the power of the holy light pushed its devout believers to the peak of the plane's power. As long as the Envic plane continued on its current path, after thousands of years, there would eventually be one holy knight who would break through the shackles of the plane's power and become the first holy knight in the history of the Envic plane. And the moment he broke through, he would naturally become the first powerful god in the Envic plane who used holy light as his source of power. When that time comes, the Envic plane would finally have a firm foothold in the multiverse, having the cornerstone to expand and develop outward. Unfortunately, before the Envic plane could give birth to its own guardian god, the Deceit witches discovered it and broke in. Then, they built the witch tower in a place called the Dabri Highland. From that moment onwards, Envic plane was in the countdown to being enslaved. It could be said that if there was no Ada, Holy Knight Kale's desperate struggle had destroyed the interplanar transmission circle in the witch tower. According to the invasion process of the Deception Witches, Envic Bitwall would struggle for at most another 40 to 50 years before it would become a meal for the Deception Witches and become a secondary Bitwall under their rule. And now, with the changes in the situation, the Holy Knights seemed to have gained a certain advantage. They had the opportunity to capture all the Deception Witches and drive the forces of the evil sorcerers out of the Envic plane. Therefore, when there were signs of witch activity in the western part of the empire, the local Holy Light Chapel immediately sent out all their members to encircle and suppress the witch. They successfully trapped the witch in the dark forest. However, that witch's witchcraft ability was too strange. She could actually transform herself into any kind of creature, and then gain their trust, turning them into her guardian beast. A Tier 2 Silver Tier Paladin was carelessly tricked into betraying the Holy Light and becoming a true Dark Paladin. And under the protection of this Dark Paladin, the witch successfully escaped into the Dark Forest, evading the search of the Holy Knights here. As time passed, There were already 2 Tier 3 gold paladins among the team of holy knights that gathered at the periphery of the dark forest, and as many as 21 Tier 2 silver paladins. But the person they were searching for was just an ordinary Tier 2 witch. In a dark and damp, dense forest, Devon was carefully searching. In order to make it easier to fight and move, he took off his heavy metal armor and only wore a silver chain armor with a thick cloak draped over him. The greatsword that he was used to usually had also been replaced with a thin rapier, paired with a matte steel round shield. These were all the equipment he had. The dark forest lived up to its name. Tall ancient trees propped up a huge canopy, blocking most of the light from the sky, making the forest deep and dark. Even in the daytime, the forest was gloomy, and it was hard to see the sun. And in such a claustrophobic environment, there were indescribably terrifying magical plants that grew and multiplied. They were mixed together with ordinary green plants, and unless one was a knowledgeable or experienced hunter, it would be difficult to identify them. And if an ordinary person approached them without any precautions, they would be dragged into the magical plant full of activated thorns by the vines, pierced by sharp thorns or branches, and then killed by having their flesh and blood sucked dry. In order to avoid alerting the enemy, as a Tier 2 Silver Tier Paladin, Devon did not cast any holy light protection on himself. Instead, he relied on his sharp reflexes and swift sword to eliminate the magical creatures and magical plants that tried to attack him. The holy light that the holy knights mastered was good at buffing, healing, and purifying, but it was not good at scouting and searching. So in this dark forest, Devon needed to rely on the strength of his own swordsmanship, and not the overly dazzling holy light. The dark forest was silent. The magical creatures and beasts that lived in this forest, as long as they had not grown to an unparalleled level, needed to learn how to be quiet. They completed the whole process of hunting, reproducing, and resting in silence. Even at the last moment before death, they had to keep quiet as much as possible. Sound would bring them enemies, and so would the overly dazzling holy light. The first few groups of holy knights that entered the dark forest to search were not small in size, and there were even high-ranked holy knights leading them. But because they were too ostentatious, they ended up suffering heavy losses. The beasts and magical creatures that were hiding in the dark forest seemed to be extremely repulsive towards outsiders. They were easily attracted by the sound and light emitted by the groups, and thus secretly attacked the holy knights. At the end of the day, the holy knights were just a group of human warriors that had been strengthened by the holy light. If they were fighting on flat ground, with their enhanced strength and physique, they could easily crush magical creatures of the same tier. However, in the pitch-black dark forest, the combat power of the holy knights would inevitably be greatly reduced. The long-distance trekking and crossing the forest made it impossible for them to wear thick and dense metal armor, and thus, they could not defend against the sudden poison attack from the withered leaves or vines. The overgrown shrubs and spiderweb-like vines and thorns made it impossible for them to wield the one-handed sword that they were used to. Even if they switched to thin swords or short swords, they would not be able to smoothly cut the neck of powerful magical creatures. Therefore, the few groups of holy knights that went deep into the dark forest all returned in low spirits, losing many black iron knights. Therefore, the 2 golden knights had no choice but to scatter the many silver knights into the forest, carefully searching for the whereabouts of the evil witch and the defected knight. As long as they found their traces and reported back to the camp in time, the 2 golden knights would be able to lead a large number of holy knights to rush over and end the search operation with the lowest cost. Night fell. As the sky darkened, the dark forest became more and more unfathomable. Devon stepped on the slightly slippery and sticky soil, quietly wandering in the depths of the forest. Every time he stepped on the ground, he was very careful. If it wasn't the exposed soil, it was the pile of rotten leaves. He almost never stepped on the thorns and branches. On one hand, it was very likely that it was a trap disguised by the magical plant. On the other hand, if he stepped on the withered branches, it would make unnecessary sounds and attract the attention of the dark creatures. Apart from paying attention to where he stepped, Devon had to constantly scan the green vines that hung down from the tall ancient trees. Many of them were actually blood-sucking vines in disguise. There were also many poisonous snakes and leeches that liked to crawl on the vines. When someone passed by, they would silently climb onto the body of the other party. Therefore, Devon carefully moved forward while quickly waving the thin sword in his hand. Under the swift slashes of the sword, the blood-sucking vines were cut off one by one, and purplish-black blood with a fishy smell splashed all over the sky. One by one, the heads of the patched snakes and iron-striped snakes were chopped off. Their long and powerful bodies twisted and twitched violently, stirring up a mess in the surroundings. But at this moment, Devon suddenly stopped, raising his nose and lightly sniffing. There was a thick, rotten and moldy smell in the humid air, mixed with a hint of a woman's body fragrance. There was also the strange sound of splashing water. Chapter 967. This was a small pool in the depths of the jungle, and it was the only source of water for dozens of miles. However, at this moment, it was occupied by a youthful and beautiful figure. The sound of splashing water was coming from here. A naked, beautiful woman was standing in the waist-deep pool of water, gently cupping the water with her hands and splashing it on her body. This small pool of water was less than 20 square meters, and the water was not deep. It was dark green in color, and the swaying water completely covered the woman below her waist, revealing only her infinitely beautiful upper body. Her slender and soft waist, her shockingly large curves, and her smooth and delicate neck and back were all so eye-catching, giving off a soul-stirring and shocking beauty. The other party seemed to be unaware of Devon's approach, and was still gently cupping the water, rubbing her plump and beautiful chest. Devon gently squatted down, using the lush shrubs to cover his body, slightly narrowing his eyes and slowly scanning the surroundings of the pool. On a boulder east of the pool, Devon saw a pile of scattered clothes and ornaments, as well as a bulging waist pouch and a belt filled with various colored reagent bottles. But looking around, he could not find the figure of the traitor who had left the holy light and entered the embrace of darkness. Was it a trap, or was the enemy careless? He had no idea. However, in front of him was indeed a rare opportunity to attack. The other party's naked body was 4 to 5 steps away from his equipment. If he suddenly attacked, it was very likely that he would seriously injure the other party, or even directly kill her. Devon's heart could not help but thump. Should he carefully retreat and pass on the information of the witch's location, or should he directly attack? For a moment, he was somewhat hesitant. At this moment, a rustling sound suddenly came from the jungle opposite the pool, and a deer jumped out of the bushes, curiously observing the witch in the pool. The beautiful witch seemed to be startled by this sudden visitor as well. Immediately after, a charming chuckle appeared on her face. She muttered a few strange syllables that no one could understand and gently waved her hands. Suddenly, 2 green ribbons stretched out from the edge of the pool and wrapped around the deer before it could run away in fear. Slowly, she pulled it towards the witch. What a great opportunity! The other party was casting evil witchcraft, and the target was not him. Devon no longer hesitated. The surging power of holy light surged in his body, and under his rapid chanting, it quickly transformed into dazzling buff. The seal of justice, power blessing, divine protection, just judgment, divine impact. In order to maximize the lethality of the surprise attack, apart from divine protection, which was a defensive buff, the other buffs either increased strength, agility, or divine attack. Devon, a Tier 2 Silver Tier Knight, only needed 2 or 3 fingers to complete a full set of holy light blessings, thanks to his powerful instincts that had been honed through decades of hardship. His own strength was also growing exponentially under the impetus of the powerful holy light. Devon originally only had 21 points of physical strength, but now with the +3 strength buff of the Tier 2 power blessing, it quickly rose to 24 points. Then with the +1 strength buff of the Seal of Justice, his physical strength skyrocketed to 25 points. This kind of physical strength was not inferior to most Tier 2 magical beasts. His agility, vitality, and spirit also increased by different degrees under the multiple buffs of the Holy Light. If before the buffs, his physical strength could only be considered as a Tier 2 beginner, then now, his strength had skyrocketed to at least a Tier 2 advanced, a whole 2 ranks higher. However, the only flaw was that he did not wear the holy armor, and he did not use the one-handed greatsword that he was best at. But with the ultimate strength and the extension of the holy light, the rapier in his hand could also unleash a terrifying killing power. Just when the beautiful witch realized something was wrong and turned her head back, Devon leaped out and cast the charge skill in the air. His whole body carried the dazzling holy light and turned into a light sword, as fast as lightning. He rushed towards the defenseless witch 20 meters away. The witch's charming and delicate face looked so twisted and horrified under the dazzling holy light. She retreated with all her might and swept up 2 water pillars that shot up to the sky to collide with the holy sword that was stabbing towards her. Die, girl! Devon's body slid across the surface of the pool like a sharp arrow. The rapier in his hand was immersed in a dense milky white light, and in an instant it was only half a meter away from the witch's smooth neck. However, at this moment, a pitch-black, lightless greatsword suddenly reached out from the surging pool water, swiftly stabbing into Devon's exposed abdomen from below. The holy protection on the surface of his body seemed to have no protection in front of this strange black greatsword. It was stabbed, and the hilt was almost gone. The horrifying sharp tip of the sword penetrated Devon's body and came out from his back, bringing with it a large splash of blood. As Devon slid forward at lightning speed, the long sword effortlessly cut him in half from his chest down with his strength. His chest and abdomen were cut in half, and the steaming organs inside slid out in an instant, splashing on the green pool water. Suffering such a heavy injury, Devon's charging body tilted, and he crashed into a pile of rocks on the other side of the pool. With the protection of the powerful holy light, even though he suffered such a great injury, he still retained a trace of life, and looked back at the black sword with difficulty. The pool water parted, and a tall black figure rose from it. Seeing the familiar standard armor and the strange long sword attached with dark energy, Devon cursed traitor in his heart, and could no longer hold on. He tilted his head and died on the spot. Rena had already returned to the shore, naked, gently pressing her neck with her hand. There, a dark red line of blood slowly flowed out, looking very terrifying. "Damn it! You should have done it earlier!" Rena screamed angrily. "That guy almost beheaded me." In order to lure the enemy to the greatest extent, Rena really didn't use any protection spells just now. If she hadn't moved quickly and dodged the sharpness of the rapier, perhaps it would have ended in a lose-lose situation. The tall figure shrouded in dark energy seemed to be unaware of the witch's rebuke. He slowly walked out of the pool, gently brushing off the pieces of flesh and blood that fell from his body, and stared coldly at the naked witch. Seeing the abnormality of the other party, the anger on Rena's face instantly disappeared, replaced by a gentle look. She didn't put on her clothes, and just gracefully walked to the side of the tall figure, gently stroking the cold, hard helmet of the other party, and said with a tender smile, "What, are you still angry with me? Don't tell me that after becoming a dark knight, you don't feel the sense of fullness of strength? This is countless times stronger than when you were a believer of the holy light. You should have felt it. The so-called power of the holy light is after all borrowed, and this power truly belongs to you." As a deception which, every word that Rena spat out while clinging to the tall figure could silently arouse a trace of strange magic fluctuations. After hearing these words, the hatred and pain in the eyes of the tall black shadow weakened. "Let's leave quickly." After a moment, the tall figure finally said coldly, I can feel the holy light in the distance moving restlessly. They already know of Devon's death. What about the 2 grade 3 knights? Rena obviously only feared the high-ranked knight, and didn't care about the holy knights of the same rank. One is still at the edge of the forest. The other is already approaching us, and will probably arrive in half an hour. Then let's go quickly. Hearing that a grade 3 gold knight had arrived, Rena immediately panicked. She hurriedly put on her clothes, and simply searched Devon's body, before leading the dark knight into the depths of the forest. Half an hour later, a group of holy knights carefully groped their way here, and found the horrifying corpse of their comrade by the side of the pool. A middle-aged man with a calm expression and a resolute expression crouched beside Devon's corpse that had almost been cut in half. He used his hand to rub the blood that had not completely congealed, and his face finally showed an unconcealable expression of anger. Devon's corpse still had a thick aura of darkness, and it was obvious that he had been killed by the traitor who had devoted himself to darkness. And yet the other party did not care about old ties, and used such a cruel method to kill his former comrade. This was simply infuriating. You guys bring Devon's corpse back, I'll go after them. The middle-aged golden knight suddenly stood up. They haven't gone far. With that, he did not wait for the dozen holy knights beside him to persuade him. He pulled out his greatsword, and rushed into the dense forest in the distance. With the opposition of the holy light and the dark aura that the other party had left in the air had not completely dissipated, they could forget about escaping his courageous pursuit. The dense forest flashed before his eyes. The path in front of them was completely blocked by branches and dense shrubs. Kenneth had already lost the cautiousness and calmness that a holy knight should have. He did not care about the branches and bushes blocking his way, relying on the holy armor and the protection of the holy light to barge through, letting the branches scratch and lash at his body. Only when he encountered thorny vines that were too difficult to pass through would he flash his sword, and use the violent holy light slash to carve out a rugged path in the forest. Chapter 968. After chasing for tens of miles, Kenneth caught up to Rena in a clearing in the forest. After all, Rena was only a grade 2 witch who relied on her bloodline, potions, and resources. She usually lived like a princess, and had never truly experienced a life-and-death battle. Hence, she was not resolute in moving, and seemed to be too sloppy. By the time the Dark Knight noticed the enemy approaching, with Rena's physique, there was no way she could outrun an enraged Golden Knight. Looking back, she saw the Golden Knight's body overflowing with dazzling radiance as he sprinted. Rena could not help but panic and cower. She stealthily took out a small reagent bottle from her bosom, opened it, and quickly chanted a strange witchcraft incantation. A pitch-black three-tailed scorpion crawled out of the small reagent bottle. Its 3 tails stood up high, and shot a gray ray at the tall Dark Knight. The Dark Knight's body suddenly froze. "Go, keep him busy for me." Rena hurriedly gave the Dark Knight the order to die, and ran forward madly. The tall Dark Knight's face under the mask showed a trace of despair, hatred, and relief. He pulled out the large sword at his waist, and turned around to face the Golden Knight who was charging at him at high speed. When enemies meet, their eyes turn red. Even though he knew that he was committing suicide, under the control of that damned witch's strange spell, the Dark Knight still gathered a dense and evil aura of darkness, and slashed at the front of the light barrier that the Golden Knight had condensed while charging at high speed. A dull thud sounded. The power of darkness and the power of holy light collided. Light and darkness intertwined and annihilated each other, and the 2 swords collided, creating dazzling sparks. After all, the Dark Knight had just fallen, and was not familiar with his control of the power of darkness. He was sent flying as if he was hit by a charging elephant, and crashed into countless bushes and brambles. Finally, he was embedded in the trunk of a tall, ancient tree. With such a simple collision, the power of darkness on his body was directly dispersed by the opponent. All the bones and internal organs in his body were shaken to the point that they were soft and brittle. If it were not for the armor on his body that had dissipated nearly half of the force, he would probably have been killed on the spot by the power of the Golden Knight. However, even though this was the case, he already lost the strength to resist. His entire body was embedded into the tree trunk, and with a slight struggle, purplish-black blood with a fishy stench flowed out from the broken armor. The Tier 2 Dark Knight's berserk attack had shaken Kennet to some extent. However, as a holy knight, with the blessing and protection of the holy light, this insignificant damage was negated with just 2 flicks of his fingers. Kennet arrived before the Dark Knight and used the tip of his sword to pry open his visor, revealing the pale, gloomy face of a young man. "Ash, Darwin, why did you fall?" The tip of Kennet's sword trembled. This Ike? Darwin was an elite that the Holy Light Chapel had carefully selected and nurtured. Despite his young age, he had already become a Grade 2 Silver Knight. As long as he did not make any mistakes, he would definitely have the chance to become a revered Grade 3 Gold Knight in another 30 to 40 years. After hearing that an evil witch had appeared near the chapel, it was Kennet who personally ordered Ash to go after the enemy. This was also Kennet's good intentions. As long as Ash performed well in this operation, he would definitely receive more feedback from the Holy Light. If Darwin could perform well in this operation to kill the witches, he would definitely get more feedback from the Holy Light. Perhaps, after this operation was successful, he would have the qualifications to host a Holy Light Chapel in a certain region. Perhaps, after the success of this operation, he would be qualified to preside over a Holy Light Chapel in a certain region. Unfortunately, his fate underwent an unbelievable reversal after he met that evil witch. Under the enticement and help of that evil witch, he actually fell into the embrace of darkness and became the enemy of the Holy Light. Under the temptation and help of that evil witch, he actually turned into the embrace of darkness and became the enemy of Holy Light. What else could make Kenny angrier and crazier than this? That was why Kennet was in a hurry to catch him and ask him why with his own mouth. However, this fallen Ash Darwin did not say a word. His eyes were lifeless, and wisps of dark aura floated out from his pupils. He looked as though he had lost his mind. The sword in Kennet's hand trembled slightly. There were a few times when he wanted to cut off Darwin's head, but he could not bear to do so. Finally, a sharp glint flashed in his eyes, and he chopped off Darwin's legs. He then picked up the sword that was shrouded in dark aura and pierced through Darwin's right shoulder, nailing him to a tree trunk. After doing all this, Kennet did not stay any longer. His eyes drifted towards the direction that the evil witch had escaped to, and he chased after her with all his might. It had to be said that as a Grade 2 witch, Raina was really useless. The Dark Knight had bought her 3 minutes of time, but she still could not escape from Kennet's pursuit. She did not know how to hide her tracks, and did not know how to avoid Kennet's pursuit. In the dark forest, Raina only managed to escape for 5 miles before Kennet caught up to her. This time, there was no one who could help her. Kennet forcefully withstood Raina's spells and rushed to her side. He used the back of his sword to whip her back, and completely knocked her down. He searched Raina's body for bottles and strange ornaments, and broke the tendons in her limbs. Kennet then grabbed her long hair and dragged her back. There were almost no paths in the dark forest, and Kennet had specially chosen the areas with the densest thorns. As a result, Raina's body was covered in hundreds and thousands of bloody wounds. By the time they arrived in front of the withered ancient tree, Raina's clothes had already been torn to shreds, revealing a beautiful body that was covered in cuts and bruises. Kennet suddenly stopped in his tracks, and looked at the empty ancient tree. The sword was still there, but where was Ike, who had lost both her legs and all her bones? Darwin had mysteriously disappeared. Not only was he gone, but the 2 severed legs were also gone. Damn it, damn it, damn it! Kennet pinned Raina to the ancient tree, and quickly circled around it a few times. With his rich experience in tracking, Kenneth was confident that Ike did not leave on her own. Darwin didn't leave on his own, but was rescued by an outsider. Not only was this person powerful, he also had a special method of concealment. Otherwise, he would not have left no traces behind. A witch's companion? Kenneth grabbed Raina and raised her in front of his eyes, glaring at her fiercely. Are there any other companions here? Ike? Who saved Darwin? Since she had fallen into the hands of a gold knight, and her spine had been broken, she naturally did not have the strength to resist. She raised her horrifying face that was covered in blood and scratches, and cursed at the holy knight in front of her. Let me go, let me go. If you kill me, my companion will definitely avenge me. Before she could finish, Raina was slapped twice by Kenneth. Her face was bruised, and half of her teeth were loose. I don't want to hear another word from you. Who are your companions? Where are they hiding? If you tell me, I'll give you a quick death. If not, you can just wait to be bathed in holy light. Raina's mind was instantly destroyed by the enemy's viciousness. She no longer had the arrogance and ruthlessness from before, and her entire body was trembling. It's gone, it's really gone. There were a total of 3 of us this time. There was an accident when we passed through the spatial crack, and we were separated. Where did those 2 guys go? I don't know, I really don't know. I'm here to deliver the materials for the spell formation. They were swept to some corner of this plane by the void hurricane. I really don't know. There was a divine spell in the holy light that could detect lies. After confirming that the witch in front of him was not lying, Kenneth gave up on interrogating her. Since they weren't the witch's companions, they were most likely native to the dark forest. Darwin's aura of darkness was very compatible with this place. Could they have been eaten by a passing monster or brought back to their lair? After pondering for a long time without an answer, Kenneth finally gave up on searching for Ike's whereabouts. He grabbed the captured witch and sprinted out of the forest with large stride. When his figure completely disappeared into the dense forest, a pale human face suddenly appeared on the trunk of the ancient tree with the black sword stuck in it, staring at the place where the golden knight had disappeared. After blinking a few times, the face opened its mouth wide and actually spat out Ike from the tree trunk. Darwin spat it out. At this moment, the 2 severed legs of the other party had miraculously reconnected back together. It took a lot of effort. Darwin crawled up from the wet ground, silently staring at the face. Ever since he fell into the embrace of darkness, he felt as if his soul was covered by a thin veil. What he saw, heard and thought were completely different from before. The face in front of him gave him a strange feeling that he was the same kind of person. That little witch is quite capable. She actually managed to awaken your latent darkness talent. This is a good thing for me. I actually picked up a dark knight with good potential in this inferior plane. Good. Come with me. After saying that, the ancient tree's face suddenly opened its mouth wide, and actually opened up a void passage that led to an unknown mysterious space. That Ike whose mind had yet to recover? Darwin only hesitated for a moment before he once again entered the dark passage and completely disappeared from Invic's plane. Kenneth, who had already left, naturally had no idea what was happening behind him. Chapter 969. Hossie City. It wasn't the harvest season yet, but the citizens of Hossie City were as excited and happy as if they were celebrating a festival. When the paladins in bright armor and dignified bearing escorted the rattling wooden cage through the streets, the entire city boiled over. Witches. So this was a witch. Ever since the otherworld witches invaded Invic Plain, the Zambies Empire had been plagued by witches. They plundered mines and seized high-level resources, treating the entire Invic Plain as their own backyard and doing whatever they wanted. Sometimes, to punish places that refused them entry, they would even release a plague there, not caring about the casualties of the common people. It was the horrendous crimes they committed over the past 100 years that made the citizens of Zambes hate these foreign witches to the bone. Their hearts were filled with endless hatred. Hence, when the paladins, who were the embodiment of light and justice, successfully captured the terrifying witch from the dark forest and stuffed her into the wooden cage of the prison carriage, the citizens of Hasi City flooded the streets, using tattered vegetable leaves, cold dirty water, and sharp stones to welcome the arrival of the witch. The people chased after the carriage, cheering and leaping, throwing stones at the trembling witch who hid in the wooden cage. It could be seen that this witch was once an exceptionally beautiful woman, with an impressive figure and a delicate and perfect face. Unfortunately, the deep-rooted hatred caused her to suffer at the hands of the paladins. Now she was locked in a cage like a beast, being cursed, attacked, and humiliated by the common people. The extreme pain and fear of death caused Rena to lose her previous glamorous, charming, and graceful appearance. His hair was disheveled, and his robe had been torn into shreds, unable to cover his body at all. His exposed skin was covered in dense scratches and bruises. His once smooth and white skin had already begun to wither. Wrinkles and scabs appeared on his skin like the bark of a dead tree. Rena's hair was disheveled, her expression numb as she scanned the cheering crowd around the wooden cage. She allowed the tattered vegetable leaves and sharp stones to hit her, but she didn't have the slightest intention of dodging. Burn her to death, send her to the stake. Every time a similar shout erupted from the crowd, Rena's body couldn't help but twitch violently. Her heart was filled with hatred, and her heart was filled with boundless hatred. Unfortunately, her wrists and ankles were shackled with terrifying magic shackles. The shackles were made of special magic metals and were very difficult to be destroyed by corrosive spells such as acid. At the inner edge of the shackles, there were countless fine metal spikes that pierced into the skin and flesh. Even the slightest movement would cause excruciating pain. A special mask was placed on Rena's face, and an egg-sized metal walnut was stuffed into her mouth. With this, even if there were no guards, Rena would lose the ability to chant incantations and use hand gestures to guide the casting of spells. As for those instant-cast low-level spells, they couldn't be used in this wooden cage that was filled with all kinds of strange runes. Although Invic Plain was a low-magic world, the research on magic had not been relaxed at all. This kind of anti-magic barrier that used holy light as a source of power was still something they could research. Rena's cage was directly sent to the Chapel of Holy Light in Hezath City. There, more and more holy knights rushed over from all directions, and there were as many as 5 Grade 3 Gold Knights. Of course, so many Gold Knights weren't there to guard a rookie witch who was only Grade 2, but to protect the core materials of the spell formation that had been found on Rena's body. The attack on the Witch Tower in Dabri Highland had lasted for half a year. Although the Zambes Empire had suffered heavy losses, the witches were also at the end of their tether. Based on the current situation, as long as the allied Holy Knights, who had the backing of a powerful empire, gritted their teeth and weren't afraid of the necessary sacrifices, they could break through the Witch Tower in another 3 to 4 months. If the Witch Tower obtained this batch of spell formation materials at this time and repaired the interplanar teleportation spell formation inside, it would mean that the huge casualties that the Zambes Empire had suffered over the past year would have been in vain. That was why the Holy Knights and the Empire's allied army sent back 3 powerful Gold Knights to join forces with the other Holy Knights in Hezath City to protect the witch and the materials for the magic circle. As for the Tier 4 Holy Knight, Ader, who was currently heading to the Empire's northern region, Carly also began to head west to meet up with the Holy Knights of Hezath City. Once they had a Grade 4 Holy Knight to hold the line, they would be able to spare enough manpower to escort the witches and materials back to the Imperial capital. Only in the Imperial capital would there be no need to worry about safety. Therefore, on the 3rd day after which Rena was brought into Hezath City, 7 days before the Grade 4 Paladin would arrive, Grim disguised himself and sneaked into Hezath City. Currently, Hezath City was in a state of martial law. The Holy Light Chapel was tightly guarded by holy knights from all directions. The Hezath City Guards were responsible for the security and inspection of the outer perimeter. However, there were still small teams of holy knights holding the fort at key locations such as the city gates and mountain passes. In order to prevent the witches' companions from sneaking into Hezath City, military control had been implemented. The inspection of entering and exiting the city gates was extremely strict. Ordinary merchants and caravans were not allowed to enter and could only rest in the nearby towns. Grim, who had just heard the news from the Dark Forest, had no choice but to kill a Grade 1 Black Iron Knight on his way. He then put on the standard Holy Knight armor, rode a tall horse, and swaggered to the gate of Hezath City. Seeing Grim's signature Holy Knight armor, the city guards who were strictly inspecting the passers-by at the gate immediately saluted him. Some of them even ran to inform the Holy Knights stationed here. A few moments later, 3 Holy Knights rushed out of the gate with a dozen apprentice knights and quickly walked up to Grim's horse. "May the light be with us. My brother from afar, may I know which chapel you're from?" The 3 paladins in the lead were all Grade 1 Black Iron Knight. The one in the lead was a middle-aged man with sideburns all over his face. He kowtowed towards Grim enthusiastically. Grim jumped off his horse and kowtowed in return. "May the light be with us. Greetings, my name is Yedric, and I'm from Baldan City at the edge of the Avali Mountains. I'm currently traveling near the Dark Forest. I heard that Hezath City is gathering the power of the Holy Light, so I came here in hopes of contributing my meager strength." "Ah, so you're from the Avali Mountains. I was wondering why you looked so unfamiliar. Welcome, brother. Hezath City welcomes you." The leading Holy Knight smiled. "My name is Halite, and I'm on duty at the city gates today." "Oh, I remember that the one in charge of Baldan is old Christopher. We've even had a drink together before. How is he? How is he now?" Grim shook his head and smiled. "Sir Christopher is too old. He returned to his hometown of Winterspring 5 years ago. The one in charge of everything in Baldan is Alaman Greythorn. Lord Greythorn, however, 7 months ago, he also brought a large number of brothers to Dapir." Grim had long since obtained crucial information from the memory fragments of the Holy Knight he killed, so how could he be deceived by the other party's words? With just a few words, he dispelled the other party's suspicions and put them at ease. After sending Grim into the city, the leading Holy Knight smiled regretfully. "I'm sorry, brother. This is as far as I can send you. I still need to receive the Holy Light brothers from all over the world. Let Toti bring you to the chapel. When you get there, you need to report to Garrison Officer Ancila. He'll assign you a specific task." The 2 kowtowed once more, and Grim was led by a novice knight, Toti, to the tallest and most majestic Holy Light Chapel in the city. Although Hezath City was under martial law, there were still nearly 60,000 residents in the city. The streets were bustling with people, and the atmosphere was no less lively than usual. However, when they saw the 2 holy knights in bright armor walk past them, all the residents moved to the side of the road and bowed to them. Grim could tell that they truly admired and respected the believers who represented the power of the Holy Light. Their respect was not forced at all. It came from the bottom of their hearts, from the bottom of their hearts. From this, it could be seen that the mysterious power of the Holy Light had been deeply rooted in the hearts of the people, becoming the embodiment of light and justice. The sincere admiration and respect from the people stimulated the novice knight Toti's sense of professional honor. He walked beside Grim, his young face filled with unconcealable excitement. When he peeked at Grim's exquisite armor, his gaze became even more passionate and envious. As an apprentice knight, Toti was only wearing ordinary steel armor. There were no complicated and exquisite light runes engraved on it. Holy knights above Grade 1 all wore holy armor that contained the power of the Holy Light. Whenever they gathered the power of the holy light, the holy armor would fuse with the power of the holy light and form a kind of holy light protection. According to Grimm's tests, a Grade 1 Black Iron Knight's holy light protection could defend against around 140 degrees of elemental magic damage. When Grimm was still a Tier 1 sorcerer, the strongest single-target fireball he could conjure only had a fireball of 115 degrees. This meant that a Grade 1 Black Iron Knight could completely withstand Grimm's fireball, rush to his side, and cut him down. Of course, Grimm could only cast a Grade 1 fireball for 3 seconds at most. Therefore, if a Grade 1 wizard fought against a Grade 1 Black Iron Knight, the Holy Knight would undoubtedly have the upper hand in a narrow room. Chapter 970. Garrison Officer Ancilla's room was on the left side of the Holy Light Chapel's training camp. It was a simple wooden hut. When Grimm was led into the hut by Toady, Garrison Officer Ancilla was fighting hard against the pile of documents on his desk that almost reached the ceiling. Hearing the sound of someone entering, Ancilla raised his head and stared blankly at the two. After a long while, his eyes regained focus. He was a Grade 2 Silver Knight. Although his physique had deteriorated due to his long hours of work and he had a big belly, the holy light radiating from his body was a real Grade 2 Knight. Report. Respected Garrison Officer Ancilla, Apprentice Knight Toady has been ordered to. The young knight stood at attention and reported loudly. Unfortunately, he was interrupted by the impatient garrison officer before he could finish his sentence. All right. Toady, you have to come here at least 3 times a day. You may not be tired of these boring honorifics, but I'm tired of it. Also, remember to praise the holy light before you speak next time. Yes, garrison officer. All right, you may return to your post. I will personally receive this holy light brother. Yes, garrison officer. After standing at attention again, Toady turned around and left the hut. The garrison officer Anselm also couldn't help but look at Grimm. May the light be with us. Respected garrison officer, how do you do? My name is... Grimm did not dare to be careless and immediately reported to Ancilla according to the Holy Knight's etiquette. Of course, his words were the same as before. In this foreign world where the flow of information was not complete, Grimm was not worried that his lies would be seen through by the enemy. Moreover, with Sodden's divine ring, Grimm could easily convert his elemental energy into pure light element. As long as he did not make a move, it would not be a problem to hide from these holy knights. To be honest, none of the holy knights would have thought that a wizard from another world would be able to sneak into their ranks. After all, the holy light was a product of the power of faith, and it was one of the powers that wizards hated the most. The garrison officer was naturally happy to see this young knight who came from afar and was willing to give his all for the holy light. Although in a few days the legendary Lord Kali would soon arrive, but before that, Hezath City was still in great danger. It was said that Hakan City, the core city of the northern part of the empire, had been destroyed by a wizard invasion. 2 Tier 3 sorcerers, a man and a woman, had invaded Hakan City and started a fight. They had even summoned a large number of terrifying flaming creatures. Even with the protection of a powerful Tier 3 Golden Knight, Hakan City still fell to the enemy. With the death of the Grade 3 Knight, Hakan City was reduced to rubble. In this battle alone, close to 200 holy knights perished in the sea of fire, their souls returning to the embrace of the holy light. The entire Holy Knights' northern division was heavily damaged. Without hundreds of years of recuperation, it would be difficult for it to recover to its original scale and quality. And the shock it brought to the Zambi's empire was no less than the first invasion of the evil witches 100 years ago. With Hakan City as an example, no holy knight dared to say that the Chapel of Light was absolutely safe. Especially when the witches and the materials for the spell formation were transported to Hezath City, the atmosphere suddenly became tense. Worried that Hezath City would suffer the same fate as Hawkins City, the Holy Light commander and the garrison officers all sent out a call to the surrounding chapels, calling for them to come and protect the land of glory of the Holy Light. In just a short time, the Hezath Chapel of Light was overcrowded with people. After briefly explaining the situation here to Grimm, Ancilla apologetically asked him to temporarily stay in a hotel near the Chapel of Light. All the accommodation and food expenses would be paid for by the chapel. Of course, Grimm understood such a rude request, and happily agreed. And so, under the protection of 2 guards sent by Ancilla, Grimm successfully moved into a large hotel that was only 2 streets away from the Chapel of Light. Here, Grimm met with the paladins from the cities around Seath. Of course, they were all Tier 1 Black Iron Knights. Even if the living facilities in the Chapel of Light were insufficient, it was still possible to squeeze some space for the Tier 2 Silver Knights. Therefore, almost all the Black Iron Knights were assigned to the outside of the Chapel of Light. If this was any other country, the Holy Knights would have long been dissatisfied with the difference in treatment. However, these Holy Knights were true believers of the Holy Light. None of them cared about the difference in treatment. Instead, they gathered together and discussed the possible evil sorcerer. When all kinds of Black Iron Knights gathered together, there would always be some who were especially well informed. Therefore, many people would gather around them to listen to them talk about the stories that happened in the northern part of the empire. Balrog, Fire Giant, Mechanical Witch, Fire Creature, Giant Dragon, any one of the bizarre story elements could make these Black Iron Knights feel a sense of danger, not to mention that they converged in the same place at the same time. No matter how great a city was, no matter how many Holy Knights were guarding it, if they were to encounter such a powerful evil sorcerer, they would inevitably become a sacrificial offering. Unless they had a guardian like a Tier 4 Holy Knight, the Holy Knights would have to pay an unimaginable sacrifice if they wanted to defeat such an evil sorcerer. While they were chatting, Grimm inadvertently obtained an extremely valuable piece of information. A Tier 4 Holy Knight was rushing here from the north. It was estimated that he would arrive in Hezath City in 7 to 8 days. This piece of information was spread by the high-ranking knights of the Holy Light Chapel to reassure the Black Iron Knights. However, they never imagined that the terrifying fire sorcerer would infiltrate their ranks and obtain this extremely valuable piece of strategic information. With Grimm's strength, could he fight against a Tier 4 Holy Knight? What a joke! If the news said that the Tier 4 Holy Knight would arrive in Hezath City tomorrow, then Grimm would definitely leave tonight without any hesitation. Coming to Envic Plain was only to complete a mission. Grimm didn't want to risk his precious life for it. The reason why Grimm was so unrestrained and devoted to the battle in Hezath City was because there was no one there that could threaten his life. Even if he was besieged by several Tier 3 Holy Knights, Grimm was confident that he could escape with his own strength. It was precisely because of this confidence that he chose to put everything on the line in order to obtain the most benefits in the short term. After hearing so much fragmented information today, Grimm pieced it all together and came to a conclusion that made him feel slightly afraid. That Tier 4 Holy Knight had suddenly appeared in the north. It was very likely that he had come to kill Sherfone. However, after he left Hezath City, he was chased by a group of wizard hunters. In order to avoid being hunted down, Grimm suddenly thought of escaping for 1,000 miles, which coincidentally allowed him to avoid the blade of the Tier 4 Holy Knight. He wondered if those fellows who were chasing him were still in the north. If they had hesitated for even a moment and remained there, they might have run into that Tier 4 paladin. Although wizards had always looked down on warriors and knights, they still had to pay a certain amount of respect to high-grade warriors. Otherwise, they wouldn't even know how they died. The situation in Hezath City had already been investigated. The person who had fallen into the hands of the Holy Knights was none other than Witch Rena, who had entrusted him to protect. As for the materials needed to repair the teleportation spell formation, they had also fallen into the hands of the Holy Knight. Faced with such a situation, even Grimm could not help but scratch his head. He had to save her. However, how and who to save was a matter of great importance. If he could only choose between the two, Grimm would undoubtedly choose to snatch the materials for the teleportation spell formation. Only by sending the materials and resources to the Witch Tower and having them repair the teleportation spell formation would he have a chance to return to the Magus world. As for Rena, if he was lucky, he would save her. If the risk was too great, he would just treat it as if she was already dead. Therefore, the most important thing now was to understand the situation inside the Holy Light Chapel, where Rena was being held and where the materials were stored. Before obtaining detailed information, Grimm could only choose to lie low and silently gather information. However, passively waiting was never in Grimm's character. Before the Holy Knight appeared in Hazeth City, he had to carry out a rescue operation. Otherwise, once the Holy Knight arrived, the higher-ups of Hazeth City would definitely hand over the materials to him for safekeeping. At that time, no matter how bold Grimm was, he would not dare to rob a Grade 4 Holy Knight. Time was of the essence, and he did not have the luxury of slowly infiltrating the Holy Light Chapel. As such, Grimm had already begun his operation on the outskirts of Hazeth City the night he arrived. Before entering the city, Remy, the plague spirit, was left alone by Grimm. The current plague poison spirit was completely different from before. With his Grade 3 strength, he had the power to protect himself. The resonance between their souls allowed him to maintain a mysterious and subtle soul connection with Grimm, even though he was thousands of miles away. Therefore, Grimm, who was in Hazeth City, only needed to use his soul to send an order to Remy, who was hiding outside the city. And so, a sudden plague swept through the outskirts of Hazeth City. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.